Good evening. This is the Planning Board. Tonight is February 28th, 2018. It is 7:06 p.m. Welcome. I want to note for the record before we get started that this meeting is being recorded by Harbor Media. And I know Sarah, my colleague, would like to make a statement.
Yeah, I'm just sorry for the sunglasses and hat, but I am struggling with the repercussions of a concussion, so.
Thank you, Sarah. The first item on our agenda this evening falls under old new business, administrative reports. Mary, do we have any administrative reports this evening? No. Good enough. The next item is the review and adoption of minutes from previous meetings. Do we have any minutes to review tonight? We did them Monday night. Good. Perfect. Great.
Did you put my comments in the meetings minutes Monday night? I sent through some comments.
We saw your comments. Yeah, we edited them a little bit, but we primarily put them in, yes.
Is
Yeah,
there
I
a
think we-
copy of that I
sure
could just
Mary-
see?
We included the majority of them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's one that,
Okay.
one sentence I think we took out.
Yeah.
The majority of them are included.
Okay.
So the next items on our agenda are the public hearings for the proposed amendments to the Hingham zoning bylaw. And tonight, we're going to start with accessory dwelling units, and we do have a time constraint. One of our members needs to leave tonight at 8:30, and so it is our goal, whether that were the case or not, it's our goal to get through and hopefully get to a vote on accessory dwelling units tonight. But with that time constraint, I think hopefully we can work even more efficiently to maybe be done by 8:30. So, for the benefit of those in the audience and those joining us at home, I'll just back up just a little bit. I'm not going to go back in the Wayback Time Machine, but just to set the stage for where we are tonight. So at our last meeting, we had, I think, a very productive group discussion in which we continued to impose limits on how accessory dwelling units would be allowed in Hingham. We started in the fall by deciding we would limit to the primary dwelling. So that's the biggest one, that the accessory dwelling units that we're talking about at this point do not include carriage houses, garage, barns, pool houses, anything of that nature. And that was already part of it. At the last meeting, we went on to add a number of new limitations. The biggest one really being that we are requiring the accessory dwelling unit to be occupied by someone of a familial relationship, a family relationship. So that, we had talked about whether we would allow rentals and whether we're allowing third-party sort of neighbors, and we're not. We're limiting it to family. So that's another big limit in terms of mitigating some of the concerns that the board members had about having ADUs in town. We also included a 5% cap of accessory dwelling units base of the total single-family dwellings in town. So in other words, limiting the number of accessory dwelling units that we could possibly have in town. And when we talked about that number, 5% sounds low, but it's actually a pretty reasonable number, and we don't even think we would ever get there, but we think it's prudent to put in a cap. We also put in some limits on the size of accessory dwelling units. We talked about the lesser of 900 square feet or 40% of the gross floor area. We talked about no more than 2 bedrooms. We talked about a minimum of existing lot size of 5,000 square feet, provided that there's adequate septic and sewer capacity, which the septic and sewer capacities add their own real limitations on the number of people in town that would actually be able to avail themselves of this portion of the bylaw. We also inserted language which requires the homeowner to annually certify to the building commissioner that they are owning it, it's their, that they occupy it and that it's occupied, the other unit is occupied by a family member. And upon the sale of the unit, again, that certification process would be, and we talked about that at length last time. I'm just reviewing sort of what we did last time, big picture. So from there, what I think would make sense would be to go back to the language. Mary and Susan were kind enough to go through it, and Susan sent us today a clean bylaw and a red line which shows the changes from the last meeting, which is really helpful. So I think we should start and go through it by section, and so what I am going to do is start by reading the purpose, the entire purpose section, and that's what I'll do as I go through it. I'll read each section, and then we can talk about them as a whole. There's only 5 sections. So in theory, and I also have a couple of comments from advisory committee, and I'll get to those as we go through them. So that being.
Quick
Yes.
question?
Yeah.
The green, where does the green come from?
Okay, let's see. With family members.
Green shows things that are moved.
Okay.
So
Thank
that's
you.
like the cut and paste feature,
Okay.
I think, within the track.
Oh,
changes.
that's right. That makes sense.
So it's not new stuff, it's just relocated.
Thank you, Mary.
Right, so.
So, the purpose that we agreed on at the last meeting is that, consistent with the master plan goals adopted March 20th, 2017, the purpose of permitting accessory dwelling units in existing dwellings is to, A, provide accessory dwelling units without adding to the number of buildings in the town or substantially altering the appearance of the dwellings, and for the purpose of enabling owners of single-family dwellings to share space and the burdens of homeownership with family members, as defined in this section 5K, while also protecting the stability, property values, and residential character of the surrounding neighborhood. B, to provide housing units for family members with diverse housing needs, including, without limitation, family members with mental and physical disabilities. And C, to enable the town to monitor accessory dwelling unit construction, for code compliance. So I guess I'd like to know if we have consensus on this section.
I had a couple of, been thinking about this since we last met, and I had a couple of concerns that I wanted to put on the table on section 1. I'm concerned primarily with the aspect of this that doesn't really limit it to existing homes and existing homes that have been permitted for a certain amount of time.
So if that would maybe be in the eligibility, maybe we'll get to that in the eligibility section for existing, because that wouldn't necessarily be in the purpose, right?
Well, I think in the purpose we reference existing, so I think I'd like to
Okay.
stay with existing dwellings, but also in one of our earlier drafts, and I went back and looked at our drafts, plus I looked at the minutes in the drafts from the Accessory Dwelling Unit Study Committee back in 2014 and 15, and I saw an emphasis on a couple of things. One was, we had some language that said, one, that the board may grant a special permit for one additional dwelling unit in a single-family dwelling for which a final certificate of occupancy was issued at least 2 years prior to an application for said permit, or if no such certificate was issued, which was legally occupied prior to that date. And also, in terms of purpose, we were saying that that the owner of a single-family dwelling, for the reasons that they would be renting primarily for their sharing the space and the burdens of home ownership, but it wasn't primarily for economic benefit. And I'm concerned with, and when I went back through and read this, I'm concerned with the issue of, the distinction between an accessory dwelling unit and a primary residence and two-family zoning. And,
Okay, so let's take this one at a time. If you look in eligibility requirements in the red line version,
Yeah.
3C,
Yeah?
that is the provision, and it is crossed out presently, but why don't we talk about that when we get there? And that's the 2 years, that's the language you were just quoting.
Yeah, this quantifies in terms of eligibility on the single family. I could talk about that point
Yeah,
there.
so let's put a pin in
Yeah,
that, and we'll get to that later. And then now you're talking, tell me specifically what you want would change in here.
I think I'll go with my concern, and then I can figure out the language. My concern is that an existing dwelling, if there's no time frame on it, anyone could buy a dwelling and convert it to a primary with an accessory dwelling unit, irrespective of how long it's been occupied. And so what that does is that opens up to me, opens up a can of worms in terms of people buying a house commercially, or they're buying a house that's empty and they want to basically convert it, and that opens up the door to tearing the house down and building something new if we don't say it's only for existing. I'm thinking of unintended consequences. And
So it says existing, though, right? So
it
there's
says
no-
existing,
Yep.
but I think
And then if the eligibility, if we get to that point
if
where
you
it has to
back it
be
up in terms
2
of the
years.
eligibility, now then we're not talking about new dwellings, and we're not talking about dwellings that haven't been occupied legally for a certain minimum amount of time. And I think that all of this is in the support of, that this is really a familial reason for entertaining this, and it's for no other reason.
Right.
So, and just as the overview, I am still concerned about, do we have enough here in the purpose where, you know, we're really not talking about two-family zoning, and I think that that's my concern about this, is that how do you basically set up a series of controls where that isn't the next logical step in terms of interpretation?
Well, that's where you have the eligibility
Yeah, the
requirements
controls would probably be an eligibility. 'Cause we
and
can
the
put-
dimensional and
yeah.
design requirements.
Okay.
And I think that because we have B saying, you know, it has to be family members, I think we make it pretty clear up front that this is our intent, not to create two-family homes, but to create, you know, in-law type apartment.
And I'm wondering if we don't just basically put that definition in there and just basically call it an in-law apartment.
Well, it
A
isn't just
relative-
in-laws, though, right?
I mean,
It
it's
could be
it's
children, it could be a cousin.
It's a relationship. It's a relationship dwelling unit, I guess.
Right, and when we look at the definition.
Because if you look at B, it does say family members with, you know, we added mental and physical disabilities as well, right?
I think that was
So-
Susan's way of
Right.
capturing it. Susan will be joining us shortly. She's in another meeting for a few minutes, but that was her way of capturing our intent to
Yeah. Right, we
help
talked about
disability.
disabled adult children and,
So the definition that is referenced in the purpose in section 5K is family, one or more persons of recognized family relationship maintaining a common household, including domestic help.
Where have you got that in this one?
So in
That's
here,
two?
right,
It's
so it
in
says,
two.
family
Oh, I
members
see.
as defined in section 5K, and then if you look
Okay,
in the
you go in the
zoning
zoning bylaw in
Yes, that's right.
5K.
If you want to look
Okay,
at
all right,
Family.
yeah, okay.
So I think we're clear on that, for sure, that it's not, in fact, two
Okay.
families. It is very specifically one family. Does anyone else have concerns on this section?
I think
Or
it captures, I
comments?
think it captures what we've been talking about.
Okay,
Yep, I'm good with it.
great. So then let's move on to the next section, and again, I'll just read through the whole thing so we can talk about it in its totality, and then if we need to drill down, fine. So section 2, definitions. An accessory dwelling unit is a self-contained dwelling unit within a single-family dwelling, which second dwelling unit is subordinate in size to the principal dwelling and otherwise complies with the provisions of this section 5K. So that's the family thing again. For the purposes, so B, for the purposes of this section 5K, a family member shall be a person related to the owner by blood, adoption, or marriage, and may also include domestic help. C, a principal dwelling, for the purposes of this section 5K, is a single-family dwelling exclusive of the area that constitutes the accessory dwelling unit. D, a single-family dwelling with an accessory dwelling unit shall not be deemed to be a two-family dwelling. So there, that's your point too, Gary. So those are the definitions, and I know Susan drove sort of the need for why those needed, how they needed to be defined and where. Does anyone have any comment on this section?
So in this section, basically, you're making a distinction between the primary dwelling size and the accessory dwelling unit, saying that the unit shall be the single-family dwelling is exclusive of the accessory dwelling unit size, and thereby, by reference, the accessory dwelling unit is separate from the single. But do we reference in here, the only constraint we have on size for the principal dwelling and size of the accessory dwelling unit is a prescriptive size of, was it 900 square feet or 40% of the size of the
The
house?
lesser of those, yes.
Is it 40% and 900
Yes.
square feet?
Yep.
It's in 4C.
4C. So now I'm thinking, and again, I'm thinking of unintended consequences, you know, we don't relate the size of the dwelling to the size of the lot in the residential districts.
Nope.
And so I'm concerned about scale and proportion and size, and again, as we've been discussing in a number of hearings, about there are different kinds of neighborhoods where different size houses are located on different size lots. And the older neighborhoods that are prior to the zoning bylaw being enacted have a different kind of scale and size, and seemingly would be more manageable relative to maintaining the single-family character of the building and the relationship to the lot in the neighborhood. But then I look at the neighborhoods that were developed after the zoning was changed to emphasize single-family zoning only in the town, and this is after 1952 or 54, if I have the dates right. And I'm concerned about small, single-family houses in neighborhoods where the lots are small, and the relationship of a additional dwelling unit of so many rooms or so many square feet. There's no sense of a limit relative to percentage. So you could potentially have a 1,200 square foot house in a subdivision, and you'd have 40% of that would be a 600, 500, 600 square foot unit. And now all of a sudden, now that house is a third larger than any other house in the neighborhood, and I'm thinking of this as to, these are prescriptive criteria to control.
Well, let me ask you this. We're in the definition section.
Yeah.
So are you proposing a change to the definition
Well,
section?
I think there's an issue here relative to we talk about area and we talk about principal dwelling, but we don't talk about the relationship of the dwelling to the lot and the lot to the neighborhood.
It's in section 3C, so I think if you wait till
Okay,
you get to
so
the
we'll
eligibility
talk about
requirements, you...
Great. Does anyone else have any comments on the definition section?
The definitions are solid.
Did you talk about...
No, I do not.
Caregivers?
No.
The one comment that Mary and I talked about after this got sent out, because it was caught after the fact, was the definition, looking at the definition of domestic help is really more, the definitions when you review them are not geared towards caregivers, and I know that one of the concerns the board expressed is if someone needed an au pair or nanny, or you had an elderly person who needed in-home care. So the question I was just going to pose to the board is whether you wanted it to include domestic help and caregivers as a special, just in case there's any kind of confusion over whether domestic help is too narrow a definition for a caregiver.
So you want to say or caregivers, or and? Is that an
Can
and
also
or?
include domestic help and
But you're talking about a live-in caregiver.
a live-in caregiver.
Not a
Right.
visiting caregiver, or
What
not
do you think?
visiting help.
Yeah, if the definition of domestic help doesn't include that, then
That is
we
what
should...
we-
I think there's a question as to whether or not it's
If
broad
it's silent
enough.
on it, yeah, then
Yeah.
I think that certainly was the intent when we were
Yep.
talking about it.
Yep. Okay. Sarah, do you agree?
I agree.
Great.
Do we have to define these? Like, do we have to say what live-in help is, or is that clear enough? I mean, I think it's clear enough, but I just didn't know.
What do you think?
Well, I mean,
Susan?
I think that when you look at the plain meaning of the word, sometimes you just, and that's what I was doing with domestic help this afternoon. It didn't extend to anyone who is a caregiver.
Yeah.
But I do think there's kind of plain defined meanings of these terms that would generally apply.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, if there's, go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm good.
Sure? Okay. So if there's nothing further on the definitions,
So
then.
can I just...
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go back there.
Absolutely.
So we're going to put in domestic or live-in help or caretakers, which is the...
Caregivers, I think is the...
Caretakers, is that the one we're using?
Caregivers.
Caregivers, okay.
But live-in caregivers, right?
And it's
Did I hear
in,
that? Yeah.
it's in...
I mean, the
or.
live-in
I don't
part's
think they live in-
implied.
right,
because
implied
an
'cause it's a
accessory
dwelling
unit.
Where they're
unit.
going to live.
Right.
So, I don't think
And
you need
it's
to
an
say
or, am I
live-in.
correct?
Sorry?
An or.
Well, it may also include, so I think it would be and, but not to get all
And I think we should say live-in.
approach on your territory.
No, I don't have an opinion, I'm just asked, I just didn't hear it, I'm sorry. My ears have been affected by my concussion as well.
I do think we should put the word live-in, though. It's just anything that's left up to interpretation is going to be a loophole.
But they're dwelling units.
I know it's a dwelling unit, but a caretaker, when one hears that word, they don't usually think of it as live-in.
So what's the concern? That they're in the accessory dwelling unit but not
I
living
thought it
there?
was caregiver.
It's what I'm concerned, yeah, I'm concerned is,
Not caretaker, it's caregiver, just, I think
Yeah,
a caretaker
caregiver.
is someone who takes care of property.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Your residents are
true.
living
Good
there.
point.
That's, yeah.
caregiver is a good word. I'm just concerned about numbers of people living in the house, number of people visiting the house. And, again, it's number of cars, it's number of people, it's density of people traveling to the neighborhood.
But you're saying you want to require the domestic help and caregiver that they're creating this accessory dwelling unit, you think we need to state that they're live-in?
Well, I think that if you don't, then you're talking about an increase of intensity of use that's not localized in the house, and...
But a caregiver could come anyway, Gary. I mean, I could have a caregiver right now at my house without any permit, not living there. But, I mean, obviously, if they're living in a bedroom, it wouldn't matter if they didn't have their own unit, but
I think a lot.
we don't want
yeah, a lot of people
to
probably
prescript
do.
that, because
Caregivers come.
as people need it, they
Right,
need
that's
it.
the more traditional.
Home health aides, personal care assistants.
Okay.
All right. So then, Section 3, eligibility requirements, and again, I'll read the whole section, and we have a couple things that we already know. We're going to talk about C and the deleted C, which is red. The new blue C and the deleted C I have pins in. So eligibility requirements. I cannot read this one. The Board of Appeals may, and this is where Victor Baltera had a comment that we should change this to be, may only issue, so if you want to insert that on yours. The Board of Appeals may only issue a special permit, A1, for an accessory dwelling unit that meets the following minimum eligibility requirements. A, as of the date that the application for a special permit is filed with the Board of Appeals, the total number of accessory dwelling units shall not exceed 5% of the total single-family dwelling units in the town. And then in parentheses, that's defined, it's now a defined term, the ADU cap. The ADU cap shall be determined by a fraction represented as follows. The numerator shall be the total number of accessory dwelling units allowed by special permit pursuant to this section 5K, plus the number of accessory dwelling unit permit applications pending approval before the Board of Appeals, and the denominator shall be the total number of single-family dwelling units existing in the town as classified in the Hingham Assessor's records. B, the applicant shall, at the time application is made for the special permit, be the owner of the lot and single-family dwelling thereon in which the accessory dwelling unit is proposed, and must certify in such application that, 1, the owner currently occupies the single-family dwelling or will occupy the principal dwelling or accessory dwelling unit as his or her primary residence immediately upon issuance of the special permit, and 2, that the other unit shall be occupied by a family member. C, the area of the lot on which the existing single-family dwelling is located shall not be less than 5,000 square feet, or, in the case of new construction, shall comply with the applicable minimum lot size for the single-family zoning district in which the single-family dwelling is proposed. D, the application must be accompanied by written confirmation from either 1, the Board of Health, that the requirements of the Massachusetts Title V Septic System Regulations and the Hingham Board of Health Supplemental Rules and Regulations for septic systems have been or can be met, or 2, the sewer department, that there exists available capacity in the applicable sewer district, in either case, to support the total number of bedrooms proposed for the lot, inclusive of the accessory dwelling unit. E, only one accessory dwelling unit shall be permitted within a single-family dwelling and per lot, so that the total number of dwelling units per lot shall not exceed 2. F, in Residence District D and in Business Districts A and B, accessory dwelling units are only permitted in pre-existing, non-conforming, single-family dwellings. And because we're going back to the comment which had been deleted from the last meeting, but Gary wants to talk about again, I'll read that, which is that the accessory dwelling unit shall only be permitted in a single-family dwelling for which a final certificate of occupancy was issued at least 2 years prior to an application for said permit, and if no such certificate was issued, which was legally occupied prior to such date. Does anyone have comments on this section?
I do. In subparagraph A, basically, the 5% figure came from, I think, comparing other towns, and it came as a number that has been sort of inherited, I guess, from our earlier conversations.
It also comes from the state statute, right?
The proposed state statute.
Which has not been enacted,
That's
which
right.
would be Senate Bill S-81 and House Bill 2420, which are currently in discussion at the State House. Now, my concern with this one is that right now, in order to be essentially independent of the 40B requirements. We have to have 10% of the housing stock in the town, the quantity of the houses and the dwelling units in the town meet affordability requirements. If we basically were to fulfill 5% of the existing number of dwelling units in the town, which is about 10,000 units, plus or minus if I have my numbers correct, that represents 500 units. My sense is that 5% is half of the 10% affordability to be on that 10% list, so to meet that criteria. So my concern is that every accessory dwelling unit that gets permitted in the town becomes a market rate unit because it's not eligible to be an affordable unit, because I doubt that the owner is going to agree to the regulatory requirements that the
Yeah, we're
Department
definitely not
of
putting-
Housing and
right.
Community Development are going to impose on an apartment.
Susan wants to address
No,
your
when he's done. I'm
Well,
like-
yeah, can I finish? So my concern is that I question the 5%. I think it's too high. I question it for a number of reasons. One is I'm concerned that what we're doing is we're approaching infinity. We would create quote-unquote affordable units, certain percentage of these on one side of the coin as an accessory dwelling unit, and that what we're doing on the other side of the coin is we're now increasing our market rate quantity of units in the town, which puts us further and further away from being free and clear of the 40B requirement. And, I'm concerned about that. So that, again, it's an unintended consequence, but it's a real consequence, and so I question the 5%.
Okay.
I also question it for a couple of other reasons.
The 5%?
One, the 5%.
Okay.
The other reasons is that outside of this building, I have not heard much of a demand for this kind of a statute. I haven't heard a large demand for accessory dwelling units in the constituency that I've talked to or the people that I've talked to, but I have heard a lot of it in this building. And so I question just how much of a real actual need there is, and thereby I think to establish a maximum cap of X goes too far too fast. I think I would have a much reduced cap. I mean, I could see, even if you did 1%, that's 100 units. It's not 500 units. So I'm concerned about that. Satisfying a certain perceived need, on the one hand with the ADU, I think exacerbates our 40B problem in the town. And so I think that's a real concern that has to be discussed relative to quantities
Yep,
and...
I think that's right. Okay. Susan?
Yeah, a couple of things. I would note that until Jen proposed it at the last hearing, it was never considered, even by the study committee, to have a cap. So it would have been a unlimited number prior to Jen recommending a cap. I have reviewed all the numbers with Emily Wentworth, who monitors the subsidized housing inventory for the town. There are approximately 9,000 housing units of all types in the town. She said only approximately 80% of them are single-family. So that would bring your number down to about 7,200. 5% of that would be 360, and as she noted, you only need one affordable housing unit on the inventory for every 10 units. So even if all 360 were permitted in the town over how many years it would take to have 360 permitted, it would only affect the inventory by 36 units, which the town currently has enough units to get it to 2030. So Emily, who's charged with monitoring these numbers down to the last unit for the town, is not concerned that this would have any negative impact on the town's subsidized housing inventory going forward, because she doesn't anticipate that, she believes it would take years, if not decades, to even have 360 of these even requested in the
Right.
town.
Right.
So if I understand, excuse me, if I understand what you're saying, Susan, that the way I read it is that it was the quantity of market rate units that it would add to the overall quantity of market rate units in the town, from which then you do your analysis in terms of percentages. I didn't see it as, if it's only out of that overall quantity, just having one affordable unit gets you a certain credit. I'm not sure.
It's 10%.
Yeah, that's how it
It's
works.
1 out of
So
10.
it would, this could potentially, under today's numbers, now granted, the number of overall units may grow if you get a 5-lot
Right.
subdivision, get 5 more houses, so the numbers are fluid, but currently, 5% of the current stock would be 360 units, and it would only affect the subsidized housing, it would only require 36 additional affordable units in the town. And that's once you hit 360, which I don't think anyone anticipates happening overnight.
I mean, I still question, we don't have this now, so my concern is not going into this thing too fast, too soon. So why not just reduce it to 1%? I mean, I don't see,
Would that be
I don't,
72?
I mean, 72 is still a
736.
substantial amount of units. I mean, if,
My math.
No, that's wrong, 72, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
and again, it's the context concern where if you have 10 houses on a street in a subdivision and 2 of the units are accessory dwelling unit occupied, that's a certain the single-family nature of the neighborhood is still maintained. But if you have 6 accessory dwelling units in a neighborhood street that's 10 units, all of a sudden the accessory dwelling unit house is the house of the value, and the single-family house has a declining value. And when it goes to be sold, because any house that's got a unit in it, the realtors are going to say, well, it's got a separate unit in it, so the house is going to be worth much more. If you have 300 and something units over a certain amount of time, and you compare that against the building permit rate in the town, and you look at a much smaller neighborhood of, let's say, 20 houses in the neighborhood, I'm concerned about having all of a sudden a cap that allows far more than can be
Okay.
So
absorbed.
1% would be how many, 72 units?
Is that what, yeah, is our math right on that?
What would 1%?
10% would be 720.
So yeah, 72 units.
Yeah.
So, right,
That does seem low.
2.5?
How about 2.5?
yeah. I mean, if you're proposing a lower cap, I think that's fine. I put the cap in to make us feel better about it, not worse about
What would
it.
Yeah,
2.5?
no, I understand that. I still think it's too high. I think we should
would
do
be
the
180.
absolute minimum.
So 2, you're 2.5?
2.5, I think, would be.
Still think it's too high. I think you could always raise it. The thing about these things, or you can always increase it, but the thing about these bylaws, once they're in, you can't redact them, you can't bring them back. And I look at a couple of other towns, and the experiences in some of the towns, one of our abutting towns, Situate, is...
Well, here, let's get to,
We've gone
we're
through
stuck
this.
on time.
No, I
so
understand that, I understand that.
Gordon and Sarah, what are you thinking about this? Gary's proposing a lower percentage than the 5% cap. Do you have thoughts on this?
Well, I guess I'm stuck on whether or not there is a lot of pent-up demand for this, or there isn't, right? I mean, if most of us are not hearing a lot of it outside of this building, as Gary said, then the likelihood that we're going to have some stampede of accessory dwelling units that's going to hit that cap anytime soon, I think is unlikely. So, but I think the suggestion of putting a cap in is prudent, right? Because we don't know, and we want to go slow. I just think if we're so restrictive for those people that do want it, it's going to look like we're setting it up to fail. So I think our job is to try to strike that balance, and I think a 5% cap on a 7,200 single-family town. I'm not opposed to shrinking it a bit. Don't get me wrong, but I think a reasonable cap is something that we should consider.
Sarah, do you have thoughts specific?
Yeah, I don't have a big problem with the 5% cap. I do think it's a reasonable amount. I, would be okay with shrinking it a little bit, but I agree with Gordon's comment that it will make us seem disingenuous in doing it, like we really don't intend to make this possible. I have heard people talk about it outside of town hall, so especially family members, parents, wanting their parents to move in with them. So I'm okay with the 5%. I would be okay with reducing it a bit.
Okay.
So if I could just add to it, so I think, so first of all, Jennifer, I commend you for putting that in there. Gary does make a good point about we always kind of want to go slow with these things. Gary, I think 1%'s too low, but I'm okay with 2.5 if the board feels that's okay. You said 720 would be 2.5?
180.
No, 180.
180?
180. I think that's fair.
72 just seems
I would-
real low.
I'd be happy with 2.5%.
But 2.5%,
I don't think we're going to get there for
180.
so long that I still think it's fine, but
Yeah.
I don't mind the concept that we would reduce that number.
How many permit applications do we have a year? Building permit, do you know how many, Mary? I know when I look in the journal,
1,300 a month.
I know when I
Right,
look
but the
in the
most of those
journal,
are-
it looks
most
like
of
quite
those
a
are
few.
additions and or electrical permits or
Right,
kitchen
but I mean-
renovations.
Tents get building permits.
Or dwelling units, I'm trying to get a sense of the proportion, the absorption proportion of units, you know, the house, or the other metric that one could use is, there were so many dwelling units 5 years ago, then the town, there were so many, an increase of so many 2 years ago, an increase in dwelling units a year ago. It gives you the general idea of the absorption rate, and how that, you know, how that has an impact on the density, and then how this would relate, but
I'm getting the sense that 4 of us support this being 2.5%, but I'm not sure, Gary, what.
I'm not
are
with you there, I'm
You're
not
saying
there.
no.
I think it should be as low as it can be, and then you know, figure it if it works, do a test run. If it works, great, but if there's no cap on it,
Yeah.
then you can't redact it.
Yeah, I will say with all of the other limitations that we wisely have put on this to make it the right bylaw for our town, I'm comfortable, even if it got to 180. I mean, I think that if there were, which I don't think there are, 180 folks in this town that have a real need for a family member to live within their home, I mean, I think that number's a long way away, but, all right, well, if we,
I think
Go ahead.
2.5 is a good number, kind of compromise.
I'm good with that.
okay.
Jen, I'm just going to suggest in the second line, again, I just am erring on the side of caution of clarity, that it read, the total number of accessory dwelling units in the town shall not exceed, and now I believe that the consensus was 2.5% of the majority of the board.
Mostly
It's maybe a
But the
majority, it's not a
or let's put it
consensus.
this way, the majority of the
Yes,
board is saying 2.5%? Okay.
Yes, we're getting there. Okay. Does anyone else have any other comments on this section? Okay. So we need to talk about the provision that Gary wanted put back in. I don't remember having a lengthy discussion about this issue last time, but I know that, let's talk about the 2-year thing. I think this comes from the Concord bylaw, right?
Yeah, it comes from a couple of them.
So this is the one that says, the accessory dwelling unit shall only be permitted in a single-family dwelling for which a final C of O was issued at least 2 years prior to the application for the permit, and if no such certificate was issued, which was legally occupied. So the idea there, and I know you said this before, but just to bring everyone to where I am at the moment, is that we don't want folks coming in and building a home in which their family member is going to live with them in an in-law apartment or a child in a separate apartment. We somehow, that would preclude folks from doing that. We only want people who already live in the town or have a house in the town to be able to do this.
I'm also concerned about that if the intensity of use is increased by 50% or 40% with a unit in the house, and the house is purchased in, let's say, in this time frame, that one could come in and just basically raise the house, tear the house down, and build a new house that's 40% larger with an accessory dwelling unit. Now, it's buying an existing house, but it's not occupying the existing house for any amount of time. It's not putting that distinction, that requirement on it, and I think that's key, because I think what will happen is that if we don't have that limited to existing occupancy over a significant amount of time, it's going to change the pattern. And so I think what it does is it supports, I think, the stability in a neighborhood where people see a house and it goes up for sale, and it doesn't have yet another development opportunity available to it that, you know, to me is new construction, it's not existing construction. So that's why I think it protects the abutters. I mean, the primary impetus of the concerns that I'm expressing is, you know, in the context, I see zoning as basically in place to protect the abutters.
Yeah.
Because they're the silent party at these hearings.
Yeah. So
And,
let's find out what others think on this.
yeah,
What
okay.
does the rest of the board think on this particular issue?
Well, what about 5A? Didn't this say, doesn't talk about occupation?
Let's see.
thought I
3B,
saw it
well,
somewhere. 3B doesn't talk
says
about
that at the
application.
time the application, they have to already occupy the home or will occupy it immediately upon issuance of special permit. That language means that they can't be built on spec. So you can't have a builder come in and say, oh, I want to build a house with an accessory unit in it. There has to be an owner of the house who is living in the house or is having the house built specifically for them and a family member who would occupy immediately upon issuance of the permit.
No, I
So
understand.
there is protection against new construction on spec.
Right.
I understand that language, but I still think,
Well, let me hear what the other,
Yeah,
let's find out what the
okay.
others.
Sure.
Gary.
So can you just clarify the protection? So if I came in and said, I want to build a house with an in-law apartment, what in 3B would prevent me from doing that?
So in the application.
Special permit, obviously.
The special permit, well, right, so as opposed to just building a house within and getting a building permit before the building permit was issued with it, the owner, the person who intends to occupy it as their primary dwelling, would have to apply to the zoning board and certify that they would
They're
be
gonna be
living in
living
one of the units and that a family member would be living in the other unit. And they'd have to get a special permit before a building permit's even
be
issued.
issued,
So
yeah.
in a new construction,
You need the special.
in a new
permit.
construction scenario.
Right.
If they're already living in the house, then they're coming in and they're either converting rooms or adding on to create it.
In a new construction situation too, before that special permit was issued, the zoning board would still make sure that the dimensional requirements
Right.
and all the other conditions were met before it was built.
Right,
True,
Right.
right?
right.
but we're still not entertaining any new construction applicability relative to this bylaw, as far as I understood.
So Gordon and Sarah, what do you think on this?
It's the new
If you have
construction
thoughts.
versus the house has to be in existence for 2 years before you can put an ADU in it. Or you have to have lived in the house for no, there has to be a C of O. So yes, the
Right.
house
It
has
has
to have
to
been
exist
existed for
for
2
2
years
years.
before you can add an ADU to it. Or it could be any from new construction anytime after.
So no new subdivision could offer a home with an ADU.
Right.
For 2 years.
Well, they'd have to build the house.
They'd have to build the house.
Sell the house, and then the owner would have to come back 2 years later to convert
Right.
to an ADU.
So,
Right.
so
You
then that suggests that anybody anybody that wants an ADU is, again, not to steal your term, unintended consequences, they're being directed towards an existing home that might not be appropriate for it, but they need.
Or they'll have it built for it anyway,
And wait. Right.
or have it built for it anyway, and then convert it illegally to an accessory dwelling unit and never get it permitted.
Yeah, or wait.
Or buy an existing house, as Gordon said, that might not be appropriate, and there might be more extensive renovations needed to make that existing structure kind of fit their needs, which could be prescriptive.
Right, because what's happening now, and Mike Clancy will tell anyone who asks, is the houses are being built with these already factored in, which only involves a door or two to go up after the C of O is issued to carve it off. And he's got multiple sets of building plans that he can point to that he believes that that has happened, but he doesn't have a right to go in and knock down people's doors.
Sarah, do you have anything you want to add on this?
No, I don't feel strongly about this. I think if it means a lot to Gary, I'm fine putting it in.
Okay, I will say, because I haven't weighed in on this, when we originally started with this, like, if it weren't owner occupied, if it weren't limited to family, I would absolutely see the need for this, because you wouldn't want a developer coming in and building houses and having a second unit and renting them out and not living there. But where we have made this so limited in that it has to be a family member, I think I said this at the last meeting, but I'll repeat myself anyway, I don't have a problem with someone, if they're coming into Hingham and buying new construction, and they want to design it so that grandma can live with
Or
them.
their nanny.
Or their nanny, or their adult child. I don't see the harm in it. So I don't have a problem with not requiring the 2-year thing, but, on one vote, so. Bill, what do you think?
You make a good point. I'm okay with it because of the family restriction.
Yeah, I think it
I think
changes a
that
lot of
limits,
things.
it does, it changes the entire dynamic of what we're trying
Right.
to do. And we're trying to serve the need state that's been identified as a family need.
Okay.
But you said nanny, are we not talking about butlers anymore?
Alice is moving
Who
in.
mentioned the butler?
I didn't say butler. I didn't say butler.
Was it you said butler?
Alice is moving in with the Brady Bunch.
Anyway,
But it-
I kept thinking about butler when you just said.
Gordon, what do you think? What do you say?
I mean, I think I'm understanding Gary's concerns a bit, but I also think that if you prohibit new construction, then you really are potentially, you're driving folks to some of the neighborhoods, potentially, Gary, that you're most concerned about, and I hear you on those concerns. I think that that's exactly right. So I might be reluctant to prohibit new construction that might have an ADU, which might be a preference, but if it's not allowed, then they're driving to some of those older neighborhoods that you quite rightly expressed concern about. So,
I mean, under that scenario, that would be a situation where someone wasn't a resident in the house, or the house had not been occupied by the person wanting to do the ADU, and to me, the familial aspect of this basically is geared towards people in an existing house who've been in the house, who now, because they're aging, want to, for example, want to have the opportunity to have a family member live there. But I think all these other scenarios are development-based scenarios where someone evaluates property relative to its ability to be increased in size and intensity of use. And so that's another discussion. That's not, that would be more a speculative kind of an ADU approach. But I don't see that. I don't see the arguments. I'm not convinced by the arguments that you had made relative to this provision that we should not require a occupancy for a certain minimum amount of time, because it speaks to neighborhood stability, and it speaks to the fact that this is not a development model. This is more of a familial,
Okay.
making life easier for people in the homes model. At least that's how I've always seen it expressed, and how,
But when you look at our purpose,
No,
right,
that's right.
we don't say that it has to be, of aging in place. I know you brought up the aging in place.
I mean,
which is certainly
I'm using it
something
as a
to talk
familial. I mean, in the
Right.
context of, in all the committee meetings that we had on the study committee, the need that I heard expressed was basically people are living in an existing house,
about. Right.
and their children are grown up, and now they're thinking of, they're aging, and they're thinking it would be nice to have their children be able to live in the house. It's more of a nuclear family
Yep.
kind of a situation. And that situation, to me, speaks to over time. In other words, they've lived in the house for a while. They want to stay in the house, which is totally, appropriate, and we want to help them do that, but they want to be able to bring the children, or if it's children, they want to be able to bring their parent, whatever. The age isn't the issue, it's the relationship. But I see the whole thing as non-speculative.
Okay.
Going down the
It's
other...
5 minutes of 8, and you
Okay.
need to leave at 8:30. So,
Okay.
Could I just offer, I frequently get young people coming into my office, and the older I get, young may not be that young. But
It's all relative.
it's not uncommon for me to have a young householder come in and say, we'd like to have our parents live with us. They're getting older. They live out of town. We live here. We'd like to have an accessory dwelling unit, but we want our own spaces. So I would just offer that a lot of times we talk about keeping the elderly person in the house, but there's also, a younger generation who's fortunate enough to live in town, has children, would prefer to have their parents with them, whether it's to have grandma and grandpa babysit or for other reasons. So sometimes the shoe's on the other foot. And if people are upwardly mobile and looking to move to a town, they sometimes think about that, so.
okay. Thank you, Mary. So, I know that Bill and I made our positions clear, and I'm trying to figure out where we are on this so that we can move on and get to the rest of it. Gary, I think it's clear that you want this provision in there. help me out, Gordon and Sarah, on where you are at this point.
Again, I worry that we're going to get awfully restrictive on this, and that we're going to have some exposure on that. I mean,
Okay.
in, again, I'm, as still in my rookie year, I don't know if this is something that can be amended in the future if we start seeing issues, right? I mean, if, particularly given the amount of discussion that we've had now, I think picking it up in the future, if in fact it is looking like something that we need to revisit, are we able to do so?
Okay.
You
Yes,
can.
with a two-thirds vote.
We just did that with the common driveways, which we just did last year, and we just revisited it this year. So certainly any bylaw can be edited, although we try not to do them every year.
Right.
Right.
I think it would be other experiences, some towns that have gone too far, is that they have not been able to redact provisions that went too far and were not specific enough. And I would say, take a look at the experience that Situate's gone through on the ADUs, because there's a lot of that. And so I think we
All right, Sarah, do
don't
you want to
have
weigh
this, so we should be very careful what we do.
Sarah, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, it seems like the majority of the board is fine omitting it, and I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. We didn't have any other comments, I don't think, on Section 3, so I'm going to move to Section 4. Conventional and design requirements. It reads, "The Board of Appeals may issue," and again, Victor Baltera, thank you, suggested here that we should insert the word "only." So the Board of Appeals may only issue a special permit, A1, for an accessory dwelling unit that meets the following dimensional and design requirements. A, the architectural character of a detached single-family dwelling shall be maintained. B, all stairways accessing an accessory dwelling unit above the ground floor of a single-family dwelling shall be enclosed within the exterior walls of the single-family dwelling. C, the maximum area of an accessory dwelling unit shall be the lesser of 900 square feet or 40% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, but not less than 575 square feet. For this calculation, the gross floor area shall be as defined in Section 6 of this bylaw. D, an accessory dwelling unit shall not be created by an extension of a non-conforming dimension or front, side, or rear lot setback. E, any new entrance for the accessory dwelling unit or principal dwelling shall be located to the side or rear of the single-family dwelling. F, water and sewer utilities serving the accessory dwelling unit shall not be metered separately from the principal dwelling. G, additional or modified landscaping, fences, or other buffers may be required to protect abutting properties from potential negative visual or auditory impacts of the accessory dwelling unit. H, the parking requirement for an accessory dwelling unit is 1 space per bedroom in addition to the minimum required parking spaces for a single-family dwelling. I, an accessory dwelling unit may not have more than 2 bedrooms. Does anyone on the board have any comments on these requirements?
Why would we have 2 bedrooms?
Why would it have 2 bedrooms?
Yeah, I mean, I just pictured this as an in-law apartment.
Jen,
with
was
a-
that one of your, I think that was
I think
one of
one
Jen's
bedroom.
recommendations.
Yeah, why-
Yeah, I added it last
Why do you
time
think
because
the
we
2?
didn't have a limit. And
Well, I think, I like the limit.
Yep.
But I always would see it as 1.
a 1-bedroom,
One-
okay?
right,
And
what
I
other
guess
people
it came up that,
right?
I made a comment.
yeah,
Which is a fairly specific comment, but sometimes with elders that may have health issues, they don't always sleep in the same room, or if somebody's medically compromised, maybe the spouse might have a different room. And so, I mean, given that it's restricted to family, that it does, it feels like it's got a different flavor. Like, I know my dad had a stroke when he was 49, and he was handicapped the rest of his life. It changed how he lived, so that can happen.
I'm wondering if we were to add,
But why would you need the 2nd bedroom, though? So, to take a
I
guess.
still had 2 parents, so sometimes people need medical equipment or different,
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
hospital
yeah.
beds.
That's the situation
or-
for
I mean, I
both
remember,
parents living there.
My grandparents got older, they slept in separate bedrooms. I thought it was kind of odd, but they just did that. I don't know why, but
I think we're just too young to know.
it's just a
that
generation thing. but-
It's fairly common.
But I always envisioned it as like one
Yeah, I mean,
one
it's,
bedroom. But, I don't know, because when I think of this, I think of like, mom and dad, mother and father, or a mother or a father, or an adult child, and they would need one bedroom. But, I mean, you make a good point. I didn't think about like medical equipment and things like that, but, yeah.
I mean, one option here you might add to this language is that there be no more than 3 people in the ADU.
Limit the number of occupants.
Limit the number of occupants, but not, maybe if the 2-bedroom is okay, because of the argument of medical or whatever, you just limit to numbers of people. I don't know if 3 is the right number, but that's,
What do you think?
that's
about that, Bill?
done in other bylaws.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Do you think that would
Gary.
help the 2-bedroom concern? How do other folks feel about that? Feel the need to weigh in?
No, I don't think anybody could object to that. I think that,
All right.
I think 3.
And no more than, how would we word that, Susan?
Just no more than 3
More than
people.
3 people?
Nor more than 3 occupants.
More than-
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're switching the bedrooms and putting people.
No,
I think we're keeping the 2 bedrooms but also saying, but no more than 3 people.
Why 3, Gary? Why wouldn't you have 2 people?
I don't know. I was just thinking if you had a caregiver and 2 elderly people, I didn't know. That's why I
Okay.
got the 3, but, it'd have to be related, so.
I mean, and I do appreciate the caregiver situation, we can keep that, because I like it, but I know that generally, people bring in an aging parent, and then they kind of obviously you have a home health aide during the day, you have a personal care attendant sometimes come in and out during the day if somebody's working, but generally they kind of take that person in to care for them. At least that's the way my family sees it. Yeah, I mean, again, you have a PCA during the day and a home health aide come in, but I don't know if
Do you think 2 people?
Well, I don't know. I think it might be clean. I think it gets difficult to
Yeah.
regulate how many people
Well,
are
it's-
in a.
I'm glad you say that,
So
because I'm
I'm
sitting here
wondering
thinking.
if the concern is that it'll be over-occupied,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe, 1 bedroom would be better than 2 bedrooms, but, I mean,
You think if we want to limit the number of bedrooms as opposed to trying to limit the number of people. So, right, so I was just thinking of different scenarios that we haven't really thought through, but what if it's, grandma's still in the big part of the house, and one of the children who's maybe a single parent, or something, I'm just coming up with,
Sure.
this is what I like to do, and 1 or 2 children, or, maybe, I guess there's all kinds of different ways this could come about, so maybe your point is a good one about not limiting the number of people.
well, bedrooms are easier to count than occupants.
that's true.
That's true.
From an enforcement
That's a good
Static,
point.
yeah.
That's a good point.
That's right.
Would you limit the number of family units?
Family units?
I mean, I was going off,
Well, they all have to be related, so,
Or a caregiver.
or a caregiver, right? I agree with Mary that I think, the more you're putting on this, like the family relationship, all these, the harder the enforcement's going to be. So I
Let's go with
think
the bedrooms then.
going
2 bedrooms?
I'm fine with 2
Okay.
bedrooms.
Okay.
I did have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, when we resolve that, let's.
We did.
Okay, good. On why not less than 575 square feet? I mean, do we have to
That's in the, it was just to make it consistent with the downtown overlay district, which has a minimum apartment size in it. And so just to be consistent across the bylaw, but if, and I'm a really bad judge of this, so I'll leave this to people who, and Gary, you know architecture and square footages and what that looks like. I don't know whether, I mean, there's plenty of studio apartments that are 300 square feet. So,
Right.
I mean, if people feel like they could do, so for example, in an assisted living unit, those are kind of little studios.
Yeah.
And they're usually in the 250 to 300
Yeah.
square feet.
right, I mean, typically, a 900-square-foot apartment is 25 feet or 20 feet by 45 feet. 20 feet by 45 feet is the floor plan size of a 1,200-square-foot house,
Right. if it's
to a
2 floors.
1.5, 2-story house. So
Yeah.
a Bradley Woods house is 900 square feet footprint. a house in Liberty Pole built in the late 50s or 60s when that was built, the smaller houses have a footprint of about 900 square feet. So this unit, 20 by 45 on one floor, is a big unit. And you know, when we do residential units at MIT, a studio 600, a one-bedroom 750, a small two-bedroom is 900. That's a two-bedroom apartment with kitchen and bath. So that gives you a sense of, you know, the basic living area size of this accessory dwelling unit is the size of a small house in a subdivision. And also thinking of that just in terms of scale and density, I would also say that I think we should make the unit sizes smaller.
Wait, let's stick to Sarah's point
Okay,
first, about
yeah.
the minimum.
Right, the 575.
I don't know
should
that
it
we
be
need to
bigger or
go-
I
smaller?
agree, I think I agree, Sarah,
Any
that we don't
minimum.
need a minimum.
Yeah.
Because if someone wants a 300 square foot small
So
studio,
take out the.
Take it
But
first.
not less than.
everybody,
Okay.
Gordon, you go with
Yep,
that?
I'm good with that.
All right.
I mean, the other thing, too, is that, you know, we say that the maximum area is 900 square feet, but I would also add a provision that at no time in the future could it ever be enlarged greater than 900 square feet. In other words, when it's permitted, it's 900 square feet. The problem in Situate is that the original dwellings are permitted, but the living space built is twice the size. Because once the building has an occupancy permit, all sorts of reconfigurations can happen on the inside, and nobody can come in and monitor it.
Okay, so you're
So-
suggesting
Well, it already-
inserting a statement that says, and it shall never be expanded beyond that?
Yeah,
But it already says that, because it's
Oh,
the
okay.
lesser of 900 square.
But he's talking about the future.
Talking about the
He's
future.
looking for a
But this is a
forward-looking
special
statement.
permit, so when, right, if people come in illegally and change their walls around, which is, you know, probably happens all the time, there's no way that's ever gonna get caught. If they're gonna move the walls around to increase the unit size, they're gonna have to come in for a building permit, and there is a special permit in their file which permits a specific size accessory dwelling unit. So, you know, I think, you know,
I think you're-
listen, I guess my comment is, and I think it was similar to kind of other provisions that over time had come out, which is to state something that's already inherent in the bylaw.
Right.
Particularly where you don't restate it in every single section of the bylaw. So that's like saying you can get a special permit for X, but you can't change it without, you know what I mean?
You're saying
Well,
it's
that's
in-
true
it doesn't
for
need
every
to be
permit you
stated
get.
Because it's
Right.
it's inherent.
It's inherent that you get a permit for a
all of
certain
these
use.
conditions. We would need to put it on every eligibility requirement if we were to put it on one. And maybe putting it on one and not on the others would
Right,
actually be worse.
right.
Then-
So, you know what I mean? It's kind of, it creates kind of a
Yeah.
cumbersomeness, if that's not a word, to the bylaw, which doesn't
Right.
really add to the.
Stating things that are obvious in one place and
Right.
not throughout. I see that point.
Plus, they'll have their annual certification, so if the special permit's enforced.
True.
And they're certifying annually, and they came in to get a permit
Okay.
to modify the floor plan, the building commissioner would see that.
Right.
That's a good
All right.
point.
Okay, so,
that, if you could just put that in the parking lot enforcement was another concern I had, but it was down and further in this document, so I
Thank
just don't
you.
want to forget it.
thank you, great, I will. Let me
the,
raise one thing on D. So Victor Baltera, again, he approached me before the meeting, that D, he thinks we need to sort of just look at it and make sure we're actually stating what we mean here. So I think it actually is worth revisiting this one, just to make sure we're all on the same page and that we think it's clear. So it reads, "An accessory dwelling unit shall not be created by an extension of a non-conforming dimension or front, side, or rear lot setback." And the idea here, Susan, do you want to?
Right, so I mean, by the extension of a non-conforming, well, I guess, the way I read it, right, this is the way the board drafted it.
Yes, that's right.
uh,
I'm not pointing to you that you drafted it.
Right? By any extension of a non-conforming dimension, a non-conforming front yard setback, and non-conforming side lot setback, non-conforming rear lot setback. Now, I don't know if other people reading it would have interpreted differently, but I read it as non-conforming qualifying each
All of
of the
those.
following, those four things. I don't know if that's what the board intended, that's what it
I
says.
think that is what we intended.
So do we need to say non-conforming again? Is that what Victor's point is?
Yeah, would you, thank you, Victor.
My concern in reading it is the or, I guess, so you could read, an accessory dwelling unit shall not be created by any extension of a front side or rear lot setback. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Doesn't.
Right, so it all depends on whether non-conforming modifies those other,
Well, non-conform with the or, the non-conforming is not going to modify. it.
Right. So non-conforming dimension,
Of a front side here, or non-conforming dimension
I
including
think the
front
dimension speaks to a building dimension.
right, like a height, for example.
So you could say.
so why don't we say
So you should say
non-conforming
or non-
building dimension
or
or
non-conforming
non-conforming front, side, or rear lot setback? Does that work? I said it.
Well, then you have an or in there again, so the other, I mean,
Okay, so we could just say it over and over.
Well, I guess it depends on, I mean, is your intent that if a building already encroaches into the side setback, say, that you don't want to allow a accessory dwelling unit in an extension along that,
Yes.
that encroachment? So you're not encroaching more, but you just extend the setback.
Yes, that's what we talked about, right? Yeah.
I was near, but yes.
Question is, how do we say it?
How does that comply with the Hatfield?
see, I think that this provision leads to what Mary talked about at the last hearing, which is people will do a two-step. They'll do the two-step. They'll come in, they'll get an addition based on Hatfield, and then they'll come back after they got the C of O for that, and they'll turn it into an accessory dwelling unit. So I don't know that you're really going to, like, that this will ultimately prevail, because if, when they come back to do the ADU, they already have the legal addition, then they can do it. And now you've required them to do two steps.
So under that, you have,
Okay.
they're taking it.
You're okay with that?
So they're basically manipulating the prescriptive criteria of the bylaw, so why don't we go back in and increase the restrictiveness of the performance? You know, why don't you make the size of the unit smaller, the 40% smaller?
No, I think we're saying you can't avail yourself of Hatfield here to make,
In other words,
Right.
right, if you're
We're
making an
excluding it.
accessory dwelling unit, you can't do it at the same time as you're taking
Right.
advantage of the Hatfield
Right,
amendment.
you'd have to do it
It's at least a
separately.
two-step
and as for the
process.
Right.
two-step, I feel like, look, if that's what folks want to do, and if we've made it harder for them, great, but it is our intention as a board that this should be a provision of ADUs.
Okay. So then the question just comes to the wording of it.
Okay, thank you.
An accessory dwelling unit shall not be created.
Could say by any extension of
Within
non-conforming
any-
dimension or encroachment within, encroachment into or within a front side or rear lot setback.
Isn't it that the nonconformities shall not be increased as part of an accessory dwelling unit application?
So the nonconformity,
You know, like the opposite of it.
Yep.
you do that too?
All right. So we're going to work on language that reflects,
Well, let me just think about it while you
While
keep
we keep
going,
going.
and then we'll come
Perfect.
back and we just
Let's do
hold
that.
it for now.
okay.
Is there any interest in making the size or the percentage smaller? I mean, that's
In the unit?
borrowed from other bylaws, but is that specific to what we want to do in this town?
I'd be amenable to make it smaller. Gary, what do you recommend? I mean, 900 square feet is a decent size.
That's a large apartment. I mean, I was
Yes, right.
thinking, you know, I was thinking 350 to 600.
How much is a unit?
A studio is 350 to 600. I was thinking of this as a
I mean, because you're right, I
one-bedroom,
mean,
not a two.
Bradley Woods house is 1,200 square feet.
Right, right.
Right, Susan?
900 is
About
two-thirds of
1,200.
seven.
About 1,200, so that's pretty close to the size of Bradley Woods house, which
Right,
I lived in for the good portion of my life with my brother, sister, and my parents, so.
right, no, exactly. It's, I know those houses
House on
well.
Oak Street right now is about 4,000 square feet.
Right, so let's talk about a 4,000 square foot house also, since we're talking about a 1,200 square foot house. So in a 4,000 square foot house, you'd be limited to a 900 square foot accessory dwelling unit, because 40% would be above
40%,
that.
right, exactly. So that,
And in a 1,200 square foot house, you would be limited to.
480.
480 square foot
Right.
unit. So the scale, that part seems right in terms of the scale to me.
In a larger house, yes, in a smaller house, no. I think it should be a declining scale in a smaller house.
But it's the lesser of. It's
No,
not the
but I mean,
greater of.
but even 40% in a 1,200 square foot house, 480, that's, to do a 480 square foot addition on a house in Bradley Woods, which is already limited by the front yard, side, and rear setbacks, the only way you can do it is go up, if you could even do that.
So
That's
let's
not
talk
true,
about.
because let me
You can
just,
go back.
I'll just say
We can go back.
for an exact example, and I don't live there anymore, so this is not a conflict for me. I lived in a 1,200 square foot house, and I put on an over 800 square foot addition, as many of my neighbors did too, on my house. So I didn't quite double it, but I almost doubled the size of my house with a 2-story addition off the back, which I was able to do with Hatfield.
Which a lot of people do, probably.
With,
My parents
yeah,
said the same
yeah,
thing.
I'd say,
Yeah.
I don't know if half, but probably close to half of the houses in Bradley Woods have been so expanded using Hatfield. So, anyway, just not, but some of the lots are smaller and you can't do really any
So
kind of
let's ask,
addition on them,
let me ask
so-
you this, like, what's the risk? What's the harm, right? Like, what are we, because I again come back to the fact that, look, this is family members, and people should be able to use their space to some extent. We're obviously prescribing it at 9 maximum. You know, we have these numbers, but what are we actually concerned about? If
I
a
think-
Bradley Woods 1,200 square foot house has a 480 square foot unit?
I'm less concerned with the architectural aspects than I am with the intensity of use and the setback and the crowding, and, you know, there's just more building and not in a lot of land.
But you're presuming that's on a small
Can I
lot.
just ask a question, because, and I may have misheard you, Gary, so I just want to make sure I understand. I thought I heard you say for a Bradley Woods house, like a 1,200 square foot house, you could have a 480-foot addition.
If you did the 40%, I'm not sure.
But no, so that's not how this is written. So this bylaw says, you have your building envelope, your house is 1,200 square feet. If you want an ADU within your house, you're segmenting 480 feet or less, if you choose to, within that house. It's not saying you get a 1,200-foot house and you get to add on 480.
Well, I think that the wording of this should be edited, because I agree with that's how it should be, but I don't see this reading that way.
That's what this says now.
It seemed to me to allow an expansion, but if it doesn't, then if you think the wording is meeting that earlier intent,
Because let's look back earlier. I thought we already talked about language that you're creating a subordinate dwelling unit within.
but we never say you're not going to enlarge the footprint of the existing
Right.
house. We never
I
say
think that the
that.
way it could be is, let's just use my house that I used to own, for example. I took a 1,200 square foot house, I made it approximately 2,000 square feet. If I wanted to create an ADU in there under this, I would then be able to make it, and somebody help me with that, so it's 40% of 2,000. 800 square feet. So I could convert 800 square feet of that to an ADU.
But you
But you would have done a two-step process.
But you
would have been
expanded the envelope, you didn't do it within.
Well, why would it have to been
Well,
two
when,
steps?
if it wasn't Hatfield, you could have expanded it at the same time as you were creating it.
Right, because the way this is worded, it wouldn't have allowed it to happen at the
So
same
you
time.
get your special permit, and then you
After.
put your building permit for the expansion.
Right.
And then you'd have your.
Right, if you weren't using Hatfield.
Correct.
Right, you could do them at the same time.
And then you could design it to
Right.
meet your specific needs.
Right.
So my only concern with the percentage scenario is that you're taking relatively small houses and making them big, very big.
But you're-
And that kind of does disrupt the character of the neighborhood.
Exactly.
And it does get outside the intent of
Which
what
they
we're
may
trying
do
to
anyway.
Yep. And-
Right.
Right, whereas like if we do a square footage cap, then I think that would serve the intent better and not create.
If you
giant
can't increase the size of the existing dwelling by any square footage amount at all, and you have to carve out of that 1,200 square feet, the 480 square feet for this unit, that's somewhat of, that is probably 90% impractical to do on a small house. On a 4,000 square foot house, it's not impractical
what
to
do
do.
you
So
propose, Bill?
and this goes to the
Well,
scale.
on square footage issue, dimensional issues, I always defer to Gary, because Gary knows architecture much better than I will ever do, and dimensions better than I do, so. Gary, what do you
I'm
think?
concerned the 40% and the 900 square feet, it's a common denominator for all size houses. I don't, in
Yeah,
all
what do you
lots.
propose?
I would say that on a house, I would do a step, a sliding scale, where if it was a 1,200 square foot house on a 4,500 square foot lot or a 5,000 square foot lot, I'd lower the 40% and I'd lower the 600. I'd cut them both in half. Because I don't see how in a 1,200 square foot house you could put in a 480 square foot apartment and still have the house intact. The only way you could do it on a small house in a subdivision is to convert the garage, the single-car garage, which most of those houses have, which is probably 10 by 20, 200 square feet, or a two-car garage, which is 400 square feet, into an apartment. It's the only way you could do it and keep the functional required spaces in the house intact.
So, but with the sliding scale make it complicated, why don't we just max square footage?
Well, the max if you do a max square footage all the way across the board, I'm thinking a house that's 4,000 square feet, the percentage of that area required for the minimum functional performance of that house for living and dining and sleeping and bathrooms and all that is a smaller percentage of that overall house than it is on a 1,200.
But we're
So-
looking to build an in-law apartment for mom and dad, or mom.
Right, so I would lower the
So
percentage.
if we put a square footage cap on it,
You
that
could-
would
you could
serve
do
the
four- you
purpose,
could
and
do-
it would satisfy your concern of
You could
a
do-
giant house becomes even larger.
Yeah, exactly. So you could do 25% and 480 or something.
Yeah, I think the assumption is that there's gonna be a million additions. And
Right.
I think practically, you're gonna see people creating these inside their houses.
Inside big houses.
I don't think there's gonna be like a groundswell of huge additions, except that within these smaller neighborhoods, people are already taking advantage of Hatfield, and they're gonna keep doing Hatfield. So, you know, you're trying really hard to stop people from enlarging small houses on small lots. They already have a mechanism where they can do that. So,
They don't
if
need
that's
this.
the case, are you making this so limiting that people are just gonna do what they want anyway without a permit?
What about if
I
it were
don't-
800 square feet or 30%? Does that feel more reasonable?
750.
Yeah, I mean,
750 being the biggest?
750 is a decent-sized one-bedroom
I just threw
apartment.
that out, I have no idea.
You know,
We did limit to 2 bedrooms,
you could do 2 bedrooms in a
right?
750.
We stayed with 2 bedrooms.
Yeah, I just think 900 just seems really big.
It is, to me, it's too big.
All
700
right, so
big.
750.
Gary said
Another house.
750 are the 2 bedrooms at MIT.
And Sarah said
Yeah,
750.
sure, 750, all right. And what's the percentage? 30%? You said
I'd go 30.
30.
It just seems almost,
All right, that's good. Okay, are we through with this section? Can we move to 5? Gary, we're going to finish before I do. 5, general conditions. Any special permit issued pursuant to this section 5K shall be subject to and shall incorporate the following conditions. A, the owner of the single-family dwelling shall occupy either the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling unit as the owner's primary residence. Temporary absences of the owner for a period of not more than 9 months in the aggregate in any 12-month period, and active military service of the owner for any length of time shall not be deemed a violation of this requirement, provided that the dwelling units may only be occupied by family members of the owner during the owner's absence. B, the owner shall recertify annually by submission of a notarized letter to the building commissioner that the owner will continue to occupy either the primary dwelling or the accessory dwelling unit as the owner's primary residence, except for a bona fide temporary absence as provided above in subsection 5A. C, upon the sale or other conveyance or transfer of a single-family dwelling which has been issued a permit for an accessory dwelling unit, if the new owner wishes to maintain the special permit for the accessory dwelling unit use, such new owner must, within 30 days of such transfer, submit a notarized letter to the building commissioner certifying that the new owner will occupy one of the dwelling units, and we can delete on, I think, as the new owner's primary residence and comply with the other conditions of the accessory dwelling unit use. D, neither the principal dwelling nor the accessory dwelling unit may be sold or otherwise conveyed or transferred separately from the other. Does anyone have comments on this section?
well, I think One question in B, the original language that was in here is that the permit would expire automatically 3 years from the date of issuance. And then there would be I think it was every 3 years, or was it every year that you'd have to renew it. This one basically says they'd have to submit a certified letter saying they occupy it, but it doesn't say that it expires. Now,
You're right, the original language talked about it expiring after 3 years. It did
It was-
not
it
have
was
a
lim- it
one-year
was limited,
renewal.
right.
But we talked about that, and I'll just remind you of the conversation that we had, which is, this is where we ended up, was that folks are putting a really big investment into their homes. And I thought that last time we were all satisfied that putting in this rigorous annual recertification process, especially now that it's limited to family, mitigates the need to really go through that special permit process every 3 years. That was, just to remind you, that's.
no,
where
I remember,
landed
and
on
I'm
that.
just, as I think of this, there's certain areas that I'm not comfortable with, and certain areas that I am, and the uncomfortable ones keep coming up. The other concern I have here is, the whole idea of, this is quite a burden of enforcement to impose upon the current structure. It seems to me that if we're going to have something like this, right now, our permitting structure is based on the zoning basis, which is single-family housing in the town. Yes, we do have some larger developments that are multifamily, but and they're all localized in one building area. My concern with this is the reality of the enforcement. I mean, are we going to set up a separate staff?
Are you
Or is
talking
it
about
going
the letters, the certification
No, I'm thinking
process?
this whole certification process is going to be, the burden on this is going to be on the building
Yeah, so
commissioner.
we had a
and
specific conversation with him, and he actually suggested this process as being something that was actually quite simple for him to implement, because he has the software already where he does this with restaurants in town, and they are required to do some sort of annual certifications. And he said it was actually rather simple for him. Mary, maybe you want to elaborate?
Correct, so we use a building permitting software, and so for annual restaurant inspections or, routine or continual inspections, he already has the system set up. And so when I spoke to him about it, if this would be burdensome, he said, no, it wouldn't. He's already got the software that does it. When the permit's issued, he would put the data into it. Now, one thing he did say was, he generally generates the annual letters that go out in like November, December, and then they have to respond, I believe, by January 1. So if you, Gary, got your ADU, say in March or, April, you may still be asked to recertify before your full 1 year. It's not going to be 1 year on the
Okay.
anniversary date of issue.
Well, then that needs to be changed, because that's what this says.
It's going to be 1 year. It's going to be annually.
Calendar.
It's going to be annually.
Just as
He said he
annually.
would generate the letters to go out in the fall, like in November,
All right,
December.
then this would have to be revised, because this is tied to the effective date of the special permit.
So, that
So
was the
it's,
structure that he.
it's basically an honor system. They sign a letter and they give them basically an affidavit saying that in fact it's copacetic and it complies. But there isn't, so let's look at the unintended consequence. We've had a couple of examples that have been brought to our attention of where people have a single-family unit, and they've rented out 2 rooms in the unit, and they fundamentally have 2 ADUs or apartments in the building, and so now the neighbors have unfamiliar cars, unfamiliar people. It's unsettling because you don't know who your neighbors are. So then the question is, the onus of enforcement basically is on a complaint structure from the neighbors, and which is basically how it happens anyway. But what I'm saying is that but again, there's an honor system process in terms of compliance, and then there's also the other things that happen because we know of the other stuff that slips between the cracks. It's just a concern. I don't know what the right answer is, but it's a concern because if the onus has to go back on the abutters, then it's a difficult situation for the abutters. And, I go back to some of the permitting concerns on this too, and one of the permitting concerns I had is that under a special permit process versus a variance process for this, under a special permit process, the burden is on the applicant where, I mean, is on the abutters on the special permit, but whereas on the variance, the burden is on the applicant. If an abutter is aggrieved by the request to permit an accessory dwelling unit in a house under a special permit, they have to appeal it if they don't agree or they don't feel like they've gotten their due process, or it's going to burden them in a negative way. But in a variance process, if they appeal it because it's more based on hardship, chances are the abutter's appeal will prevail. And I'm concerned about the balance between, again, how are we protecting the abutters?
So if I can just speak to the enforcement part of it, because I don't think that you're suggesting that this would be done by variance, right? I mean,
Well, I'm not totally resolved whether it should be special permit or variance.
You can't build in to the bylaw an ADU by variance, like you can't do that. If someone wants a use variance, they go in and they apply for a use variance, and then they'd have to prove not just hardship, but they'd have to prove something related to the shape, soils, and topography of the lot, in addition to the hardship to allow the use, which I can't imagine, at least off the top of my head, where the lot shape, topography, soil of the lot is going to have anything to do with why you need an accessory dwelling unit. So,
Seeing it more of a use variance.
right, but that's not how a variance works, and you can't
Yeah.
create a use by variance in the zoning bylaw. So you're either adopting it by special permit, allowing it as of right, or you're not allowing it at all, and we're back to, or you're just where we are today, which is they're not allowed at all.
so
let's-
can I speak to enforcement?
Sure.
This bylaw is being created because there seemed to be an interest in permitting this as an option for other residents of the town. We can't, on its face, assume that people aren't going to do the right thing. So we do typically operate by complaint. I will tell you, people are not hesitant to complain. We get plenty of them. But I would also tell you that, you know, people operate in good faith in Hingham. And I have a hard time thinking that there'll be a lot of, you know, willful violation of someone who goes through the trouble of renovating their house and getting a special permit and coming to several hearings and dealing with the abutters. You know, that's a lot of investment of money and time.
Granted.
And integrity.
Granted, I understand that. I'm just thinking, again, it goes back, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know all the legal structures and systems. However, I do have the concern of, you know, in this, I'm not totally resolved on two major points on this. One is, how do we protect the abutters? And the second point is that the history of zoning in reform in Hingham from 1941 has been to basically move away from multifamily buildings and move away from two-family houses. And although I see how this is addressing the need of, you know, a familial relationship, I'm concerned about, is this opening the door for two-family zoning in the town? And I'm not resolved on that. I'm not resolved that, you know, we can call it an ADU, and we can say it's not changing the principle of how zoning has been changed by town meeting in the last 4 or 5 reviews of it, to say basically that the basis of zoning is single-family zoning.
So I would
I'm
like
concerned
to
about
cut to the
that.
chase here.
Yeah.
It sounds like you are saying, despite all of the limits that we have put in and all of the discussions that we have had, it sounds like you don't necessarily support this regardless of what we put in it. In which case, I would suggest that I then ask if anyone else has comments on Section 5 and we move to a vote. Because if you're telling us that we can't come up with an accessory dwelling unit zoning bylaw that you would support, which it sounds like that's where you're heading, which is surprising considering the conversations we've been having.
Yeah, I mean-
But if that's where you are, then we need to just, and you're the one that needs to leave, then we should just move on. And that's
Yeah, and
not what I
I
was hoping was going to happen, certainly, and,
But,
but
you know,
if that's where we are,
Can I
then,
just add a comment?
Please.
So, I mean, so, Gary, your concern is spot on, and I think it's a concern that I've had and Sarah's had, as articulated as well. And I do share it. I do see what we're doing tonight different from a detached structure. And I know that's something we're maybe we talk about that next year. If town meeting says no to this, we probably won't, right? So I think this has a little bit of a different feel to me, because it's already allowed in certain units in town. And I think we are putting a lot of restrictions on it to service to need. But I've always kind of looked at this issue different from a structure that's not attached to the primary.
Well, I share
Because you're
that.
concerned about-
I've always looked at a major distinction between in the primary residence and in an accessory building, absolutely. Because single-family zoning is one dwelling unit on one lot. And what we're doing is we're fundamentally changing that. We're saying that it's really two dwelling units on one lot. And that's my concern. Now, yes, we put a lot of controls in it, and this has been a really good discussion. But I will also say that we had 15 meetings on the accessory dwelling unit study committee, and we came to basically similar concerns and conclusions. I just don't see how we're adequately protecting from a transition to two-family zoning. I'm not an attorney, but I just don't see
Okay, that's fair.
how this isn't opening the door, and it's, the camel under the tent kind of a thing. I understand that for a familial situation, it's absolutely appropriate, but I'm very much concerned about changing the paradigm from one dwelling on one lot to two dwellings on one lot, universally across the
Right.
town.
Okay, I think
You know,
you've
that-
made your
and that's a
point. I
concern.
think that's fair. I would like to ask if anyone else has comments on section 5.
Sorry, back to section 5.
That was the general conditions that we went through just now.
Jen, I think it would be
Yes.
good to maybe, I know, Peter's here from the Board of Health. We might want to
Oh.
ask him if he has any thoughts on this.
Yes.
Just-
Peter, are you interested in speaking on this matter? Are you here to speak on the matter as a member of the Board of Health, or otherwise?
Both.
Okay.
You want to come up to the mic?
Yeah, we would like you
People at
you're
home might want
welcome
to listen to you.
You're welcome to come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record, please.
Just listening to everything that's going on tonight, just a few comments, and I think I agree with the thought that less is probably more in what you're dealing with, and as far as the capacity of what you can do with these ADUs. Housing is a very sensitive issue, and if it gets away from us as a town, I don't think we'll get it back. It's going to be tough. So I would urge you to be more conservative in some of the issues you've been talking about. One concern that I've heard is for instance, bedrooms, 1 and 2 bedrooms. Bedrooms is something we deal with in the Board of Health constantly, and it's a tough issue because there's really not a true definition of a bedroom. We deal with housing, and if the opening to a room is 6 feet, it's not considered a bedroom, so someone will come in with a set of plans, have 6-foot openings, and build the house, close them in, and add bedrooms. Matter of fact, we had one down on Union Street where a house was being sold, and it was a 2-bedroom house. Went in and inspected it, and there were 6 bedrooms. So the issue was close the openings back up. It's a 2-bedroom house, but somebody will come back and do the same thing. So this trickles down to the same thing you're talking about. And again, this is in areas where there are private septic systems. And you did mention that the sewer department would be interested in the bedroom count. That's just one of the issues that, listening tonight, that I see as a problem. So, again, I would urge the board to be more conservative to the thought of the ADU proposal.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
very
Good,
much.
good, good
Yeah,
point.
that's a
Very
good
good
point.
points.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gordon, Sarah, did you have anything on section 5? No?
Not on section 5, no.
Or anything else?
We have a couple other things to circle back to.
Okay, great.
You're done with 5, though.
We're done with 5? Okay.
Just for consistency, for changes, in In the purpose, section 1, the first sentence, instead of existing, it should say single family, and that's consistent with the change that was made in item 1. So it
Can you
should
say that again? I'm
say-
sorry, where?
It should say the purpose of permitting accessory dwelling units in single-family dwellings.
Ah, got it.
Hyphenated single family.
Yep.
Okay.
And then going to section 4, there was just a missing dash or, in single family, in B, 4B. The first single family is
okay.
missing a dash. And then in D, I conferred, I was gonna noodle that one.
Where did we land?
With Victor, and our suggestion is that it read, "An accessory dwelling unit shall not be created by any extension of a non-conforming dimension, including the front, side, or rear yard setback." Instead of lot setback, it should be yard setback.
Okay.
So, because in other portions of the bylaw, for example, the non-conforming section of the bylaw, the setbacks, the yard setbacks are considered dimensions. So if you want to keep all the language in there, we would just do comma, including the front, side, or rear yard setback.
Comma.
Thank you.
So those were the 3. Mary, did you have something else? No.
Nope, those were them. Yeah. And we did take out in 5C, we took out that on.
Right, there was an extra word in 5C.
There was an extra word in 5C, which Jen, you noted.
Yes, on, right?
Yeah,
In the third to last line at the end.
so we did cross that off also.
Okay. I noticed that Mr. Patch has his hand up, and I suspect you want to weigh in, so please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Sure. I'm Pat Ship Street, and I was making some notes as we went along. One of the points I'm hearing, and I'm trying to reconcile in my head, is I'm hearing, on the one hand, there's a need for this, but then I'm hearing when there's a concern about the consequences of what this would permit, then I'm hearing on the other hand, well, we don't think that many people are going to really do this anyways, so I'm trying to reconcile the two points, because if not a lot of people are really going to do this, then why are we doing this? Why are we changing the paradigm of our zoning? And you can call it two-family, but basically it's two dwellings, and again, I'm just asking these questions, listening to the dialogue that's going on here. One of the rationale I heard was about trying to bring in from the cold, so to speak, all the illegal apartments that are out there. And anecdotally, I'm told there's about 300 of them or something in that number. The reality is, unless there's more enforcement, those people have no justification to come into the cold and spend the money that we're all talking about is going to have to be spent to go through this process. So if that's one of the justifications for doing this, I don't see how this bylaw is going to serve that purpose unless we have some kind of enforcement, this dialogue about what enforcement's going to be done in order to cause this to occur. And one of the things you can have, for example, is you can have a bylaw where you would have inspectional services have a right to go into properties. And my understanding, and Susan can speak to this more directly, I haven't really researched it too much, but my understanding, you can legally do things like that as long as it's not a discriminatory, based on some sort of discriminatory basis, that if you just have this broad, inspectional services where they have a right to go into a property, every 2 years or whatever it is, then you would provide sort of this incentive mechanism, then by which then one of the objectives of this bylaw will be served, which is to bring those people in from the cold. And I'm saying this because I think we need to take a bigger viewpoint of this. In terms of the actual numbers that will be generated, it's in the issue of the 40B, Yes, I agree, you don't really know how many people are going to come in to do this over what period of time. But just remember something, if we're at the cap right now, if we're at that 10%, and you end up having 100 units, 100 of these units, that's 10 units. That 10 units could push us over the cap, and you end up, I'm looking at it, then you end up saying, well, that would basically allow a 100-unit development. That would allow a Riverstone, this type of thing. So every unit that you create, market unit, that pushes us over that 10%, you're potentially creating either an Avalon type of situation or a Riverstone type of situation, or even a smaller situation where we have even an 8-unit affordable housing project, and that will cause neighborhoods to be up in arms. So I understand, on the one hand, we're talking about there's not that many units, but we have to be realistic about what the impact of that is on these hostile 40Bs. One of the issues I have about in our bylaw, and maybe Susan can speak to this as well, is the definition of a recognized familial relationship. And the question that screams out to me is, under what standard? Recognized by whom? By what standard? Are we talking about degrees of kindred? So, for example, I looked after the last time we were sort of talking about this, and I talked to Victor about it, and I looked up some cases, and basically it seems like in a lot of other states, they address this by degree of kindred, not to exceed like the second degree of kindred or something like this. So they put a limitation on this out there, and again, that's something I think we should think about as well. One of the points about the enforcement mechanism here, I think we have to be realistic that we can't put it all on the building department. We can't really put it all on the applicant, for example. So I think what we need to do is sort of be creative, think outside of the box. And one of the things I'm hearing about the certification, and I haven't read the language in particular, but I think I'm suggesting that perhaps the certification should be signed under the penalties of perjury, because there's a separate legal consequence for violating that, and it should also be recorded at the Registry of Deeds and marginally indexed or on the certificate of title to the owner's property. It's sort of to provide notice. And the last point I just heard speaking about is, if I heard it correctly, it was why would we expect the person who went through this whole process the investment to then turn around and not comply? And that's a rationale for that first person. But we're talking about the second, the third, the fourth person down the pike. That person hasn't put this investment in. They're just buying this property, and they've already bought into it. So while I understand that rationale is compelling for that first person who spends the time to get the special permit, et cetera, the subsequent owners, that rationale, I just don't think really carries as much weight. But those are just some of the thoughts, just listening to the board's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just handed out, I had referenced this at the last meeting. This is an Attorney General Municipal Law Unit decision or review of zoning bylaws adopted by the town of Walpole in their October 17th, 2016 Fall Town meeting. It was issued January, so just about a year ago. At that town meeting, they did an accessory in-law suite, and they limited it to third degree of kinship. And while the Attorney General's office did not throw it out, they referenced the Supreme Court cases related to family. In particular, they reference Moore versus the city of East Cleveland, which is in Ohio. And in that case, there was a similar, they didn't do it to degree of kinship, but they actually listed what, in their ordinance, what family members could live. So you could have a child but it didn't account for grandsons. So a grandmother who lived with her grandson was violating the law. And in throwing out East Cleveland's ordinance, the Supreme Court distinguished from Belterre, which is on Long Island in New York, ordinance which they had upheld a couple of years earlier. And in Belterre, the ordinance read, and these are cases that the Attorney General's office, they're from the 70s, but the Attorney General's office is still citing to them because they're the cases, the Supreme Court cases on the matter, on the topic. And in Belterre, in New York Village, they used the definition, and you'll see this is what I proposed today, and you guys were past this by the time I got here, so I wasn't sure if you had discussed it or not. In the definitions in 2B, the language of one or more persons related by blood, adoption, or marriage. And in the later case of East Cleveland, where they overturned the ordinance, they kind of reaffirmed what they had affirmed 2 years earlier as to blood, adoption, and marriage being a constitutionally appropriate or defensible definition for family. And so in preparing this, and I discussed this with Mary this afternoon, in looking to see, originally I'm like, well, can we just tie back to the definition of family in the Hingham zoning bylaw? And that definition, as Mr. Patch just stated, does refer to a recognized family relationship. And it also says maintaining a common household. So just a reference back to the definition in the bylaw didn't work in the ADU scenario because it's technically two different dwelling units. So that common household provision didn't really work. And then the question is, well, what's a recognized family relationship? So I called John Coughlin, I read this to him, and he says, well, where's the definition of recognized family relationship? So needless to say, I bounced around with him the idea of using a Supreme Court recognized definition, which I don't really think you can go wrong with using a U.S. Supreme Court recognized definition. And therefore, what's been proposed, and I believe you went through it in the definitions, is that for the purposes of this section, a family member shall be a person related to the owner by blood, adoption, or marriage, and may also, and as we added, and may also include domestic help and caregivers. So that's where the origin of the definition of family member came in for the purposes of ADUs. To my knowledge, there hasn't been an issue that has come up to date in Hingham where there has been an attempt or a need to enforce family as defined in the bylaw in any context. That's a conversation for another day, particularly if there was ever the, desire and resources, whatever, to kind of maybe do a complete relook at the entire zoning bylaw. Because there are some things in here that I believe do go back to probably the 1950s that might need to be updated. But that's where to be originated. And I, meant to explain that when you were doing this section, but I was late, so I apologize for that.
We circled back to it. Thank you. That's very comprehensive. Thank you. So I think where we are is asking if anyone else has any further comment on the zoning article, or if we're ready to act. So hearing no further comment or question from the board, I would ask for a motion.
I'd make a motion we act favorably on zoning article blank with respect to accessory dwelling units with the aforementioned language. Will the town amend the zoning bylaw of the town of Hingham adopted in 1941 as here to amend it as follows, as discussed herein tonight? I'm not going to read the whole thing, because I don't think I need to.
No, I already read it.
And if I read it, it wouldn't be till 10.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
The only comment I would make is, just for the record, I wanted people to understand that I put a lot of time into this as chair of the study committee, and also extensive discussions here and research. And as much as I'm very sensitive to and supportive of providing diversity of housing opportunities for families in need, my concerns here are the paradigm shift that it basically implies, and it's a shift that goes away from all of the evolving zoning parameters and strategies that town meeting has put in place. So I'm very concerned about that, and that's my fundamental
Okay.
concern on this.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, all in favor?
If I could just add
Oh,
another
go
point of
ahead.
discussion, and
Sorry.
I do want to personally thank Gary for all his work on the study committee.
Absolutely.
And his passion for the issue, because I think we have what we have, Gary, because of all the work you've done on it in the past.
sure.
And I know, I don't know how you're going to vote on it, but I certainly appreciate your effort and your passion for the subject and your respect for the character of the town, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well said.
Yeah, I think
Appreciate that.
if I, not to belabor it, but, I think we all agreed we wanted to go slowly on this, and because we did recognize a number of the issues and potential concerns that Gary has raised, and I think, I certainly hope that we have gone slowly enough, right? I think there are a number of qualifications in here that get us there, so that's certainly my hope, and it's because of the concerns that you have raised that have helped us hopefully tighten this up to test the concept, for lack of a better term, and see how the community deals with it. So thank you for that.
Quite welcome, thank you.
I've heard enough comments from people in the town to realize over my time that this is I think, a necessary step for us to make. I feel comfortable with the level of change that we're making, that we're still protecting the town. Due to the fact that, this housing is allowed, and I think we are now, making it so that people can do it in a way that's more, in pre-1941 housing. I just think that this is small enough steps, and I think it's a needed type of housing, so.
Okay. In that case, we have a motion and a second, so I will ask all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Opposed?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, as I said in the fall, it's going to be a good discussion town meeting.
Yeah, for sure.
It sure will be.
For sure. Thank you. Okay.
Thank
Can I
you.
just stick around?
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Yeah, let's take a quick 3 or 4 minute recess. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Nice job, Jennifer.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for all your work. We are back in session, and the next, item on our agenda this evening is the regulation of the sale and consumption of marijuana not medically prescribed, more commonly known by us at this point as the time, place, and manner regulation. And as you all know I am wont to do, I just want to back up just a tiny bit, and for anyone who's watching at home and the folks here tonight, just to restate that we have already voted unanimously on a ban and put forward a ban for town meeting, and that we all support that, and that we had a lot of reasons, which I listed at the last meeting, and I won't belabor them again tonight, but we had many hearings, we heard from many interested citizens, and we ultimately unanimously support the ban. What we need to discuss tonight is the time, place, and manner regulation, not because that is what we want for the town, but because if the ban fails to pass at town meeting, it's prudent as the planning board to be ready with a time, place, and manner regulation to govern how marijuana establishments in town would be regulated. So that's where we are. We have discussed this zoning article before. We mostly discussed the how, if I can put it that way, the how we would regulate it. We went through the special permit criteria. We talked about how we would regulate it. We haven't talked too much yet about which uses we would want to allow in town and where we would allow them. So I think that's where we need to start tonight.
Can I, I'm
Susan,
sorry.
please,
Yeah,
jump in.
Yeah, so, because I have a replacement pages for you, just on something that I caught.
On that which we have.
Yeah, so I think we're working off of, you should have two documents. One is the actual, and of course, I'm looking at two of the same. Please tell me I didn't. Oh, here's the zoning article, sorry. Oh, no, but that's the wrong one. Yeah. One should be the actual zoning article that says zoning article HHH at the top.
Yep, and then the others.
And then the other one should be, say, planning board, it should be, say, section 3 at the top. It's actually a track changes version, right. On the track changes version, I have a page, which if you're looking at the bottom of the pages, is a correction on the track changing for page 29. And here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll give you to advisory. One at a time. The other one is on the article itself. For the article itself, the last page, with a lot of yellow highlighting on it, this is a substitute page of the last page of the article itself. And I have some extras, let me give them to you. This is a new draft detailed article that's being discussed tonight.
I did it wrong.
No, there's the.
Here, you don't have an extra with the,
That's the last page.
Okay, I don't, we have one that's HHH.
The other one, so that one's the last page.
the red line of the zoning bylaw. I have, for some reason, and I'm sure it's in my pile here, but I have this one. I have this.
HHH.
Yeah, I don't have
Is that what he
I've
she
got a
said?
lot of, I got a
HHH?
lot of different drafts.
HHH is the
So,
time, place, and manner article.
you want something that says 2/15, February 15th at the top.
I've got a bunch of different drafts.
I know, so do
Yeah.
I. I just want to make sure I'm the
Got
most
got
recent
this
one.
one,
This speaks to
dispensary.
how much work we've done on this, because we keep revising it.
So you want one document that says Article HHH with a February 15th date at the top.
Yep.
And I don't know why I printed out, oh, this is it. This is it right here, okay. And then you want one that says, starts with section 3 at the top, which is the track changes, that also says February 15th at the top.
Yep.
February 15th?
Yep.
It was in that envelope that Mary either gave us or mailed to us. Okay.
I don't seem to have that one, I'm sorry. I have 2.5. 5,
Is it this?
5.
I just found mine, so I can give,
Well, I think Mary's making copies for
Mary
us.
is
Thank
making
you.
a copy.
It's nice of her.
I know, it's been a lot of
there's a lot of copies,
copies.
because it keeps changing, which is a good thing, right?
It hasn't changed since the 15, except I caught the mistake today, so I'm substituting out a couple of pages.
Yep. This is interesting TV. Mary, I think a few of us are missing it. And I am no longer missing it. I'm going to give you this, which is,
Okay,
you don't
thank
have
you.
this one, the
This is
215?
the one I handed
No.
out at the last meeting. You need one too? How many do we need?
I have this one, Mary. Is this
It's
it?
this one, my friend.
Does it say February 15th at the
Yes.
top? Yep,
That's it?
yep.
Yes, it says, planning board hearing 2/15/2018.
I just got it from Jen,
HHH.
kindly.
But I think you only have the one, right? You need this for 215 also, so she needs a copy of this one.
Okay.
I think Bill and Sarah.
Here, Mary, did she need this one, the section 3 one? Oh, no, this one's not the whole thing on the,
All right. There we go. So I need another section 3.
Yeah.
You need another one, now, right?
No, I'm good. I found mine.
You're
Sorry.
good? Okay,
Yeah,
so
I
then I
think
just
Bill
need one.
needs. Do you need them?
Mary, I have it like on, do you want to, I have one ready to run
You
through
just
if you
found that one.
want
There's
to.
probably one right next to it that
Okay.
looks like the other one.
I think I'm okay. I think I'm okay.
Okay, you know what? You go ahead and, I'll make a couple
Here,
copies.
I got it, Mary. I have it.
Okay.
And I gave Sarah one, so.
have it.
All right, well, that was
See?
time well spent. We're all in the same place.
So it's up to you. I don't know if it's easier, I mean, maybe you got to go back and forth to look at the article, look at the track changes. We can go back and forth, whatever you feel is easier.
I think that we should get our maps out, and I think we
Yeah.
should talk about where. And I think the easiest way to do that might be looking at the use table,
Which is in the track changes.
which is in the track,
Yeah.
as long as you guys agree. But
I
think let's
we
just get
tonight.
to
I think we
it,
want to nail down the where.
right?
Where
So
where is it gonna?
The
get our
page.
big maps
Because
out.
those are
that
the, I mean,
Mary lent us big maps for
those are
tonight.
substantially the unanswered.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have a big map over
I
there?
have one, yes. Thank you.
Next one I can shoot. You guys go.
No, we were good.
Okay.
So, where we are right now, the way it's drafted right now is the way we asked Mary to draft it, which was to draft it broadly, right? So in other words, we have, I think, 6 uses to go through, and then we need to decide if we're allowing each of those uses, and if so, where, right? So, I'll ultimately be making a proposal, but let me walk you through my thought process anyway so far. I've been talking to Mary about it. Obviously, we've all been thinking about it, but I figure maybe it's easy for me to start with walking you through what I've been thinking, and then you guys can react to it. So, that being said, let's start with the most obvious use, which I think most people think about when they think about marijuana establishments, which is the retail sale, the sale of marijuana products in town. And when I think about this, and I think about as a planning board, even though we support the ban, where would we want it to be is harder to answer than where we would not want it to be.
Yeah.
So if you look at Business A, which is Hingham Square, Hingham Center, and there's a little piece out by Hull that's also Business A. I think of those areas as areas where you park your car, you walk around, you're maybe with your family, you're in and out of shops, you're enjoying your day, you're getting an ice cream, you're getting a bagel, whatever it is you're doing. I personally, and they're in heavily dense residential areas. So I don't see those as, I see that as a sort of an easy place that I think most people in town would agree. And I certainly think that we should not allow marijuana retail establishments in those areas. So then, from there, I think, okay, what's left? We have Business B. What is that? Business B, there's a corridor that goes along Route 53 between
talking
Queen Anne's
conceptually.
Corner and, I guess that's Derby Street that cuts down. And then there's another corridor up on 3A. And those shops are different from the areas in Business A in that you primarily drive in and out of them. You're going in to pick something up and then you're leaving. It's not typically an area where a family is spending time going from store to store. So I'm more open, let's put it that way, to the idea of allowing.
Destination locations.
Yeah, these being in Business B. But then I think about, okay, because of the way our zoning is, embedded within an industrial area in the Shipyard and an industrial park area in South Hingham, we have the Derby Street shops and the Shipyard. And I liken the Shipyard and Derby Street shops to what I was saying about the square. Insofar as you park, you're walking around, you're enjoying your experience maybe with your family. And I don't envision, and I would think that most people, but at least me, does not envision the sale of marijuana in those places. So from there, I already had sort of bounced this around with Susan and Mary, and there were some exercises in the zoning bylaw that we can get to eventually if this is the path we want to go down. But to exclude it from those areas is a little different than just saying, as you can tell, because they're embedded within industrial areas. But I'm not saying necessarily to exclude the entire industrial area in either place. But that's sort of where I'm starting, I guess. Maybe I'll leave it at that on retail. That's sort of where I am on retail.
And then, Jen, could I just clarify, when you were speaking to retail, would it be both marijuana retailer and businesses dealing in marijuana
That's a good
accessories,
point.
like a
That's a
head-
good point.
we'll
So
call it head
those
shop?
two, yeah, so that's the head shop.
Yep.
Which, when I talked to Mary about it, because you two are more familiar with how the state defines these, I want to be careful in how I'm describing you as being familiar with them, and how the state just defines each of these uses, right? So that's another retail place that would perhaps be co-located with a store, or might be part of, two sides to the same shop. So yes, to answer your question, I think those are very similar uses in terms of how I have been thinking about where we would allow it in town.
So in the markup of the use table, it's 4.28 and 4.29.
Yeah, thank you.
I thought it was 4.2, oh, okay, yeah.
But I'd love to, hear what the rest of my board thinks on this sort of big picture.
I would agree with a lot of your points. I think you're right. I mean, I think we want to keep it away from the densely populated areas. I think the areas identified are good places to exclude it.
Yeah, I mean, I think avoiding foot traffic, the destination is fine. I mean, makes a lot of logical sense as you're trying to sort of define the areas. I don't know if that eases security for the facilities as well, if they're perhaps in slightly less dense areas. But it's, that's sort of half the battle. It's still sort of tricky.
Right. Do you have a reaction, Sarah, or?
I'm looking at one area which I think must be the Nantasket train station.
Yes. That is the.
Yeah, it never got rezoned. It never got rezoned. So it's still.
It's still Business B.
Business B. It's where Hingham lumber used to be.
Right.
Okay.
Oh,
But there's no chance that anything could go up there. I mean,
Right now, solar panels.
The MBTA is not subject to local zoning no matter what. So
Yeah, they can do whatever they want.
Yeah, they own it.
They own it now, yeah.
So, yeah.
So they're not subject to local zoning no matter what.
which is why the total panel's going in, right? Yeah.
Given their revenue concerns, but.
we should maybe put that on our to-do list.
Rezone it.
Official open space.
All right, we'll start the
Yeah.
list.
A lot of these next year.
So Business B would have it, as you said, on the Whiting Street areas.
A section that's quite close to Foster.
Yes, and that's where the maps that we got before come into play, so I suppose it does make sense to be looking at these things in tandem. We received two maps prior to tonight's meeting, one of which shows the exclusions which were clear in the state statute, where,
Sarah doesn't know.
That's all right, Sarah can share.
It shows the one,
500 feet of the
Yeah, thank you.
school.
Do you have extra?
So there are natural legal restrictions for a facility to be near 500 feet within a school or a place where children commonly gather, I think is the language.
yeah,
500 feet?
yeah.
500 feet. Commonly gather is the big, issue.
Right, well, we don't know if that's going to survive the revised regulations, which aren't coming out for a couple of weeks.
Right.
The statute, at a minimum, has 500 feet from an existing K through 12. The broader one that's in the regulations, that we're not sure if it's going to survive when they get redrafted, has this broader, includes daycare, and includes the term where children commonly congregate or something.
Yeah.
Right, something like
Yep.
Bill said. So that's why there's two maps that Lonnie Fournier prepared on the GIS. And the one just has schools starting K, like any classes, kindergarten through 12. And the other one has more extensive,
Yeah,
where
and
children
some of that is
congregate.
guessing, because that's not a well-defined term, where children commonly
Right.
Yeah, like the
congregate.
community center. type
Yep,
of thing.
playgrounds,
I don't know, did
I
I give you
think the
two of the same?
I noticed that when I looked at this map, I think the bathing beach
yep, that's on the,
was,
that's
was,
in the.
was marked
yep,
off.
Yep, you're right.
Crow Point Pizza, it's very, that's a,
true.
problematic place to me. Kids are there.
Yeah,
It's
that
like
is a
the
place where kids
place.
hang out, this is true.
Yeah. We've, having chaired this committee when we did the medical marijuana one, the industrial park was our place where we put that use. And there were a lot of good reasons for that. It's not a lot of abutters. It's it's the least densely populated area in terms of abutters, and I think in the town. There's a requirement of, with a 500 feet setback, Susan, is that right? Separation distance. Separation
From
distance.
from property lines.
Yeah, from property lines. So
Where-
there's some, there are a lot of natural protections in that area now. I don't, so.
I will note, you might note that in South Hingham, the Old Colony Montessori School would wipe out most of Business B in the Gardner Street, in the Derby Street area.
Oh, because it's right across the street from there.
Yeah, and so when you look at the
Starbucks is.
circle around, when you look at the circle around the Montessori School, it wipes out most of that area.
And there's schools up in the industrial park now too, right?
Right,
Yeah.
but the,
That's
so
gonna
the.
wipe out a distance of
Suesquela.
500 feet.
Yeah, the areas that are least affected by the school buffers is the Queen Anne's Corner, Whiting Street area, and then the areas on 3A.
Yeah, but if we zone it into a district and the school cuts into that, that's really not our concern.
No, that's right. I mean,
Because we don't know, we could put it in an area where children commonly congregate at some point. We'll get, the SJC will probably give us a legal definition of what that is at some point. But the legislature's not going to take that language out.
right,
So-
I'd say that if, for the sake of argument, if you only allowed the use in an area where it could never actually go, then you could face a legal challenge to that. But that's not the case here, because if the board did go with Business B, because that's what Jen put on the table for discussion, even with the radius restrictions for Montessori, I think Foster would take out some of it, it wouldn't completely eliminate it from that district. There's other areas of Business B where it could go.
I share your concern about Crow Point and some of the other places in Business B. I don't think Business B is perfect, but, you raise a good point about the medical marijuana bill and the industrial park, and we probably should have that conversation if would we want, were the reasons good enough for if the reasons were good for medical marijuana back then, would we apply the same logic now from a zoning perspective?
Well,
I guess that's-
to be quite honest, it wasn't, people who live up there weren't thrilled with it.
No, right.
They were, in fact,
Right.
and when it was realized that it was put up there, then the subsequent article was an article on the tattoo parlors, which did not,
Right.
which did not pass
Yep.
town meeting. So people are concerned about it, and I would be more concerned about Queen Anne's Corner area, and that, those areas, I'm thinking a lot of folks live up there.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of folks live off those roads up there, and you got Upper Gardner up there, you've got, is it Ackord Lane, or Sheep Run is on these roads. I just
Yeah.
don't think-
It's
But
the
you have,
same,
you have a lot of
by
people
Kroger.
along Lincoln Street,
Yeah.
too. I mean, we're not, I don't feel like by doing business B, we're placing it in one part of town.
No, because I know kids from my neighborhood walk down to Crow Point and Starbucks and the Rite Aid and the Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, it's similar.
Yeah. Kids at Starbucks a lot in the afternoons, like,
Yeah.
you know, middle schoolers, you know, maybe.
Right,
ninth
and in
graders,
that
10th
respect,
graders.
it's not consistent entirely, which is why I said it's not perfect, with what I said earlier, where we want to keep it out of dense residential neighborhoods, where you're, you know, walking by foot from place to place or from home. I mean, so
I mean, the industrial park, despite the fact that some people might be upset with that, there are no residents nearby. I mean, it's really, it's a, you know, you're really.
It's a commercial destination.
Yeah, it's industrial, you know, and so, I mean, I'm certainly, I mean, I have some issues with Business B, but I think industrial park, you know, does in many ways make the most sense, you know. And in terms of distributing it among the town and the potential impact among the town, I think Business B does that, so we do
Right.
both,
So both, you think,
I
Business
think
B
both.
and industrial park?
yeah.
Right, well, if you put it in the industrial park,
Yep.
then it'll be allowed in derby shops.
But we took it out of shopping center, though, didn't we, in the,
But,
No, but it would be allowed in the underlying district, and so
Okay, right.
that's when we brought Emily in to ask how the zoning board has dealt with this before, and she said, that's how Yoga or Tesla or
Tesla.
somebody got
Brought
into
up the
derby
Tesla
shops, is even
example.
though it wasn't technically allowed in a shopping center, it was allowed in the underlying industrial park district, and therefore they felt it was appropriate to allow it to be in there under a separate special permit. So, you know,
So if it
but
don't-
again, it's up to the board, what your comfort level.
So if
couldn't we
I'm
say
sorry,
on
you
the-
said,
So,
On the
again,
south
we're
side of
talking
Route,
about the
right south side of
retail.
Route 3 or something?
can we
Could-
modify within a district? Can we be specific within a district?
Well, I think you get to the, I don't have the statute in front of me. There's a statute
Yeah.
regarding, okay, Mary, tell me the words off the top of my head.
yeah, I think if you get too exclusive within a district.
Right, it has to
And
be
then you have
uniform, it's a
these common
uniformity
legalities.
provision of, the uniformity provision of 40A.
Sarah suggested south of Route 3.
Let me
And then that
ask
would
you
exclude
this,
Derby Street
for the
shops.
board, if you're thinking about,
Yeah.
if you're talking about the retail components, and you're talking about the retail, primarily typical retail districts, if you feel the industrial areas might be appropriate for some type of use, you do also have a light industrial and a heavy industrial type of establishment too. Granted, you haven't determined if you're going to allow those in town or not.
Right.
But, you know,
If we did, it would almost certainly be in
if
this.
you didn't allow a retail marijuana use in an industrial park, then you couldn't have it in Derby Street Shop unless somebody wanted to go in and put an industrial use in the shopping center, and they probably wouldn't, because the shopping center's already built. Could
Right.
somebody do a pad
Yeah, well,
industrial?
No,
space?
so are we still just talking about retail?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
Well,
so when you go across the table, you know, for the districts, it's hard because it doesn't have it along the top. But, you know, A, B, C, D, E, business A
But
and
it's in
B.
just two,
Right.
you know?
I think,
What about Sarah's specific suggestion that it's allowed in the industrial park, but only south of Route 3?
so, any zoning ordinance or bylaw which divides cities and towns into districts shall be uniform within the district for each class or kind of structures or uses permitted. So unless you are creating overlay districts or something like that, you can't parse within the district.
What's Mary's argument about Derby Street shops? Mary, that it couldn't be put in there?
What I'm asking is if the type of marijuana establishment that you might allow within the industrial park, if that were either a marijuana cultivator or a
Manufacturer.
marijuana manufacturer, which are kind of a light industrial, kind of heavy industrial use, would you not end up with a pad industrial marijuana use in the Derby Street shops?
No, because that's not their use. Their
Right.
use is a shopping center.
Because we're talking about, to Sarah's point, when we are focusing just on marijuana establishments that are retail or businesses dealing in marijuana accessories. And the comment was, maybe business, 2 is okay, or business B, and maybe industrial park. My thought would be, if you're talking retail, look at retail districts. If you're talking about industrial marijuana uses, look at industrial districts. And that might preclude you from getting a retail marijuana establishment within a shopping center, Derby Street shops, which, if you don't want that to happen. There's a different way to keep it out of the shipyard.
Right.
But
So just to refresh, the logic on the Tesla was that it's an automotive dealer, which is probably not an allowed use in a shopping center, but because it is allowed in an industrial park, the zoning board of appeals, that's how
yeah.
they greenlighted it for Derby shops. Okay, I just wanted to make sure we
That's how they
understood
granted
that
the-
the same
right.
thing could happen if
Yeah.
we said retail marijuana establishments are allowed in the industrial park. If someone wanted to put it in Derby, part of Mary's point, maybe you already understand
It's
this,
a
but
retail
is
use.
that the zoning board of appeals could make the same decision, which is that.
Might have to make the same
Would have, right, which is that it's
It's
allowed.
allowed in the underlying district.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so that's the potential risk in putting it in the industrial park, even though there are other good reasons for putting it in the industrial park. So that's a.
Would the zoning board of appeals have strong legal footing to say no? Susan?
Well, so we actually had a discussion where we were trying to parse all this out, and Emily was with us. And basically, we were just going on past precedent. And in the past, the zoning board has allowed uses in the underlying district into the Derby shops. So to then them say, but in this one case, we won't, might be problematic, just based on how they've interpreted the Hingham zoning bylaw for Derby shops in the past.
Okay, so the bottom line is if we say industrial park, it could
It could.
potentially include Derby.
For the retail,
shops.
yeah.
For the retail.
I'm very concerned about that risk, but I don't really know what the other options are.
Well, the other option is to not allow retail in the industrial park, to just allow it other places.
Correct, you have 4 different items within your article to look at different marijuana uses. So,
Right, this is just the first one.
this is just the retail and the businesses dealing in. So the head shops and the actual retail marijuana or marijuana edible stores.
And so, consistent logic with that we can't preclude it south of Route 3 in the industrial park it would seem that within Business B, we can't preclude it from any part of Business B. So to the point about the Crow Points and the
1,000
other.
feet from Grove Point won't work.
Right. So, we're, just stating the obvious.
Do we have a sense of how they're going to define or enforce the where children congregate, or whatever that?
We don't know if that provision is going to survive after March 15th. So until
What would
those
that
come
look
out,
like?
well, it would just come out altogether. So right now,
But we don't have any reason to think it's coming out either, right?
well,
We don't know.
well,
They could
it all
narrow the
depends
500.
on, so the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association, because there's an inconsistency in the regulations, said,
Right.
okay, which is it?
Right.
So
Okay.
they're going to have to, the commission's going to decide, well, which is it? Now, people who are proponents of letting these uses, everywhere, anywhere, obviously, there's a lot of people, because we have it legalized in the state now, might look at the same thing and say, you can't have this broader buffer zone because the statute only provides for a narrow one, whereas municipalities might say, no, you should give us the larger one. So at the end of the day, where the commission's going to come out on it, we don't know, but I would say that regulations that have 2 inconsistent provisions on the same exact topic is probably not helpful to anybody.
Right.
So it may or may not survive. I can't, for medical, a broader standard. It is where children congregate. So that was but that could change. They're merging oversight next year of medical to the Cannabis Control Commission, and they may fine tune those regulations as well. We don't know. I mean, this is all a lot of wait and see.
So,
Right,
so to Gordon's question, we don't have any sense of.
Sorry,
how that
I
would
can't
be
answer your
interpreted.
question.
So
I'm glad I tried,
I would,
but thank
I would
you.
just say, so I think Mary and Susan, you see, I'm sure you're getting a gist of what the intent of the board is. Do you guys have any recommendations?
So I defer to the board. I thought that we did hear comments at the last hearing from somebody about not making it too restrictive, that it was like a de facto ban. And I remember what you were talking about, Bill, that there was people in South Hingham that felt when medical went down there, they were getting saddled with it. You're not putting it anywhere else. So you have 4 categories to look at. You have a cultivator, which is essentially like an interior, probably grow operation, light industrial. You have the retail business, like the store. You have the retail businesses dealing in accessories, which is like at the head shop. Those are 2 retail uses. And then there's also the manufacturing, wholesaling, which is kind of more of a heavy industrial. So it might make it easier to look at them kind of, if it wasn't marijuana, where would you put it? If it was a hydroponic, light industrial, where would you put it? If it was a wholesaling place, where would you put it? Kind of thing. So Sarah had suggested maybe business B. There's a little bit in both parts of the town. There are some restrictions to it with the schools. It's not perfect, but if the board's looking to strike that balance between a de facto ban, if the ban does fail.
Right.
I don't think you'll find anything that's perfect.
No, and how about this in terms of proceeding? Maybe if we say for now, for the sake of this conversation, okay, let's assume we might put it in business B only. And then let's look at the other uses and figure out where those would end up. Because that might help us circle back to what makes sense.
Just in pencil.
Yeah, in pencil. We're not voting on it, but like, let's say if we were to allow.
Yeah, you're not voting on it yet.
We are voting on it tonight.
All right, so we're looking right now
Is that
at
okay with you guys if we move on with that being
Sure.
sort of a
Yeah,
premise?
sounds
Okay.
good.
Just so we kind of stay where we are in the warrant article itself.
Item 28 and 29.
Yeah, items 28 and 29. At this point, you would just put it, just pencil, to be permitted by special permit A2 in Business District B and prohibited in all other zoning districts. So that's what you've
Right.
proposed for those 2.
In pencil, yes.
So could the zoning board of appeals say this is too close to Crow Point Pizza and kids congregate there?
Well, so this is all coming down to this question of which buffer zone is going to survive the redraft of the regulations, which are coming out on March 15th.
But let's assume that, let's not even talk about that. I'm saying, can the zoning board say, I'm not comfortable with how close this is to a place where children congregate at Crow Point Pizza? And so
Well,
I'm going to turn
if-
down this special permit.
So there's buffer zones that are dictated by the regulations. If the one that says 500 feet of where children congregate is in the regulations after they're finalized, then the zoning board's going to have to say, what's a place where children congregate? And they may make that interpretation, that's a
Say a
place
pizza
children
place is
congregate.
exactly such
Now,
a
someone
place.
may appeal it and challenge it, and we may end up with all sorts of lawsuits over how do you define that. But unless and until, if that's in the regulations and it's not further defined, then the zoning board gets to make that determination. So
What if
yeah,
it's not in the regulations?
if the regulations will have a buffer zone in it, and whatever they say is the buffer zone is the only buffer zone the town can impose.
Cannot
There's no
unilaterally
discretionary.
apply a,
But within the purpose, in section 1, there is a B that says, to minimize the adverse impacts of marijuana establishments and businesses dealing in marijuana accessories on adjacent properties, residential neighborhoods, schools, and land uses potentially incompatible with MEs. it is a special permit A2, so there's got to be some.
Yeah, there's some
discretion.
discretion.
I mean,
It starts getting
it's an
squishy. It starts getting squishy, though.
But it's not permitted by right.
No, it's not
Twitchy?
permitted as of right.
Squishy.
Squishy.
Thought she said twitchy, I was
Sorry.
That's us, that's me.
Squishy, it starts getting squishy, you know, if you're imposing something, well, it's too close to where children hang out, when there's actually built into the statute, and there will be in the regulations, what appropriate buffers are from children, then I think, you know, they might be subject to a challenge. But,
Those are good questions, though.
yeah, I mean, I just wish I had more definitive answers, but
Yeah.
we have no case law on this yet. We probably will within the next year or two.
Right.
Well,
Well, if nothing else, this is a quick sidebar. This is a very perfect, specific example of one of the reasons we support the ban. Because if people ask us at town meeting, like, what did you not know when you made this decision? This is one of the things that we don't know while we're being required to make this decision. So,
Yeah.
A big
Totally agree.
significant thing.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. Yep.
Yep.
That's
Put a
why
pin in
we
it.
It's a perfect example.
gotta just,
Right,
I'm gonna say that we don't
Right.
support this.
yep. Okay.
A known unknown.
So no, no, no. Okay, so then let's start to think about the other uses. Assuming in pencil, we have limited both of the retail.
So-
uses.
So what about item 10? Let's skip back to item 10.
Yeah, it's cultivators.
Okay. Let's talk about, let's remind us, what is a cultivator? What does it look like? Thank you, sorry. It's an inside growing
So
facility,
it's on
right?
page
Like plants are
5,
growing.
yeah, it's on page 5 of your warrant article. License to cultivate, process, and package. So it's basically a grower, but it's not like a farm, because the cultivation really happens inside in very controlled atmospheres or environments. So it's typically going to be like a big warehouse.
And is it like chain link fence with barbed wire and security cameras, or?
Still have the special permit
Okay.
A2 security provision.
And they have
Yep.
pages of security requirements in the regulations for all types of, well, actually, they go use by use, cultivator, manufacturer, they have lists of what the security requirements are.
It helps me to visualize.
Both physical and procedural, right?
Yes.
But this section, this item also, if you choose to, includes, so it's a light industrial type of uses, which is how I see it. But it also includes or marijuana micro business,
Well, we kind of put it in there in
quotes.
quotes because we weren't sure where to put. Micro business is something that's not in the statute that the Cannabis Control Commission made up, and they may license, so it's better to anticipate that it's going to be allowed and figure out where it could go than to leave it kind of as to a kind of crapshoot as to, is it a cultivator, is it a manufacturer? It is not retail because they don't have customers that come to them.
Right there.
It's a small cultivator.
Yeah, it's a
Other
micro, like,
definition?
it's almost like a vertical, it's like
Yeah.
a vertical type of thing where they can cultivate and manufacture and deliver.
But it's a boutique
Yes,
Yes, that's it.
activity.
yes, because it's not more than, or less than 5,000 square feet-ish.
Okay.
So maybe light industrial-ish. It's small, so that's what makes me say it's not heavy industrial, but it could be heavy
Fair.
industrial.
Where the heavy comes in is the utilities. It's still going to be
Yeah.
heavy utilities, even if it's 5,000
Well, and the
feet.
security,
And security and all of that, so.
I mean, even though it's small, it's still going
It's,
to need the
it's still,
same
it's going to act
security.
just like the big ones in
So
no
it might
way.
fit better as heavy.
And just for reference, the only light industrial district left in the town of Hingham is between the Stop and Shop. It's on the corner William B. Terry, Beale, and Lincoln Street. Currently, Sue Escuela, which has a K through 5.
Yep.
Preschool through
I
5.
think it's
Preschool through 5.
Pre- through-
Goes up through 5.
Yeah, but kindergarten, right. So is the
That's the red
radius for Sue Escuela almost wipes out the limited industrial, but Sue Escuela may not be there forever.
Right, that's a private school, which,
You also have
Yeah.
like Bright Horizons in that area too, right?
Bright Horizons is in the
That's
shipyard.
right.
And that's,
oh yeah, it was there.
Yeah, that's right. It
So-
was there, right.
To Susan's point, Suasquela may not be there forever. If they're really successful, they may find a bigger location or move.
They've done that once, they were in Cohasset and they
Yeah.
moved to this space a
Yeah.
few years
Yeah.
ago.
So I mean, playing out the debate of,
They have an outdoor
for each
playground.
use to say, where would it be? If it's a light industrial use, and that's the only light industrial use, that's in North Hingham, is there a location in South Hingham where an industrial use might be appropriate? If you chose to have it in your bylaw. You could certainly say, we only want retail, or, you could limit the types of uses, then you just get to your restrictive, overly restrictive concern.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
If we limit the types of uses, right. So that's the threshold question. Do we want to allow this type of use? And if so, where?
So I would say just because Suasquela might block out, or just because a business may block out a certain area, that business might not be there forever.
Right.
And do you think it blocks out that entire light industrial?
Well, if you look at the
You
circle,
have it.
Depends how thick you make your line.
Yeah.
we kind of, well, Lonnie had to do some
Yeah, it's
guesswork
subjective, I get
here.
it, yeah.
So she kind of, we believe that Suasquela, because based on where their playground and their entrances is on is that easterly side, right?
Yeah, it
Yes.
is in the
The
back.
easterly side of that building, and it's not in the entire building, so she kind of took 1/4 of the footprint of the building, put a rectangle around it, and then did 500 feet from there. So that's an approximation.
Yeah,
But it pretty much takes up
except almost all of it.
all of the limited industrial.
Right. Well, right now, it reads that it would be allowed in the Office Park District, Industrial District, which is,
Industrial is the light purple in South Hingham. So
The office park is the,
bright
Well,
pink.
industrial's the shipyard.
it's the shipyard, and then it's Talbot's, and then those other business, and this Stop and Shop, and those other businesses on Beale Street, like the toy storage and the shoe
Yeah.
manufacturer.
Right, so it reads Office Park, Industrial District, Industrial Park District, and the Limited Industrial
that's
Park
not
District, prohibited in all other zoning
Business
districts.
area.
So I sort of think when I look at South Hingham, it probably doesn't fit into the Office Park, which is the bright pink. Similarly, I don't, even though the name of it is industrial, I think the shipyard area has by design, through our zoning, become a neighborhood. So I don't see the marijuana cultivator in the shipyard.
Well, again, there's a master permit that governs the shipyard project. So they'd have to, well, all right.
But you have
They-
Russo Marine. could
Right,
be
you have Russo
cultivator.
Marine.
Yep.
You have, if the MBTA ever sells the parking lot, which they've, proposed in the past, you have the Stop and Shop Shopping Center, which, I don't know, they just rebuilt the 99 there, so I don't know, but what would happen there. But then, I'd say probably, other than Russo Marine, the most potentially ripe area in this area is the Talbots. Nobody knows what's going to eventually happen to that Talbots, and it's about 40-plus acres.
Right. I just think my point remains the same, which is that we have purposely put, there are now, we wanted, and now there are 3, soon to be a 3rd condo development, 2 apartment complexes, and there'll be another apartment complex across Beale Street. I just think this is not, it's still, the underlying zoning is industrial, but there was the mixed-use permit that turned this into a living
Residential.
and working and
Yeah,
shopping
I agree with it.
area.
It's become more of a neighborhood feel down there now with all the
Yeah.
people living down there. I mean, we're going to have more
Despite the
people
name
soon,
industrial.
too.
Is there any place in, say, northern Hingham, that you feel that a marijuana cultivator or marijuana micro-business might fit in?
I think that is, to your point before, if you take Suasquela out of the question, just for a moment, when you look at those buildings in that block, sort of, so from Hitchcock Shoes to the toy storage on Beale Street, and those other buildings where Suasquela is, those are more industrial than like they have loading docks, and that, you drive back there, the customers aren't primarily going into those areas, with the exception of the memory care space down the bottom. That's also a place where people live.
But we can't, I mean, if we allow it in one part of it, we have to.
Right, so I'm just sort of thinking about that area, and I was gonna say, if there's any spot up in that area that
That's
would
where
be
it is.
appropriate for it,
Yeah,
that's what
I
it would
agree.
be. That's all I mean, I don't mean it's perfect.
I'll just
No,
note,
I
and
don't-
again, like, on
I
this,
agree.
there's, the only legal issue, as I noted, is if the uses are allowed, you got to zone them in a way that they're not in effect prohibited, even though you're allowing them. And the other thing is you can't kind of pick and choose within, once you pick a district.
Understood. So if
I'll
we
just,
did-
I will note, and I think this has been noted as well, but this is just an observation. I was watching the selectmen's meeting last night when they were discussing the general bylaw ban, and, you know, at least one of the selectmen noted, and the other ones concurred, a concern about the place, like that the place was going to be the most important issue if the town got the time, place, and manner, because they were concerned about neighborhoods or areas of town being pitted against each other. And I think that's kind of what you're struggling with right now. Is there a
Absolutely.
way to distribute these uses, if they're allowed, in a way that doesn't appear to be intentionally, or not intentionally, but geared in a way that it would overburden one area of town versus the other? And I just because, like I said, that's not a legal comment. I'm just kind of making an observation of kind of what other town officials, for what it's worth, for your deliberations, are also thinking about in kind of trying to figure out how the time, place, and manner is going to work.
That's what we're also concerned about.
Yeah.
We're actually dealing with it. So I would propose that it would be in, despite the existence at this moment of Suasquela, that the appropriate areas for it in town, especially if we're looking to be balanced, would be the limited industrial park and the industrial park.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. That's North Hingham, South Hingham.
Yep.
I mean, that's the best we're going to get.
Well, you mean limited industrial?
I said limited industrial park
And
and
industrial.
industrial.
And industrial park, yeah.
Right.
it's called
Because that
limited
would take it
industrial
out of Derby Street, right?
Sorry?
That would take it out of Derby Street,
yeah.
right?
It wouldn't take it out of
It
Derby
is,
Street.
on the zoning map,
Except
Susan, it
that-
is.
No, if you,
Industrial use.
Industrial
Right, the use
use.
for it. Use would take it out of Derby Street. So I think, because of the use, take it out of Derby Street, I think those are our two best.
well, I mean, it wouldn't take it out of Derby Street. I guess the question is, what's the likelihood that you would,
Functionally,
functionally, it wouldn't work with the programming by the owner
yeah.
to put in a big cultivation warehouse in the middle of their retail shopping center?
And my guess is, once we see those regulations about the security, they need to be
Yes.
freestanding structures, right?
Right.
You know, you
Right.
can't secure something like that
Right.
sufficiently if it's not a free, I'm, again, speculating on all those things that we don't know, but.
Okay.
Does the board want to have this 2.4 say marijuana cultivator or marijuana micro business, even though it's not defined yet, but we know it's probably coming?
Well,
Yes.
it is
Well, defined, but
defined.
not,
I think we should
On an
put it
interim
in, no
basis,
reason why not
I think we should include them
to.
both.
so
So
my
your
question
question,
was.
do you want to include it here
My
as opposed
question
to
is,
elsewhere?
well, no, my question is, do you want to accept that language? Right now, it's in italics, in parens,
Then I guess, yes.
and so
Well,
are you saying it's part of this?
I think the other place that we put it, Mary, was in under, like, put it with cultivator because it's part cultivator, or put it in manufacturing because it's part manufacturing.
Well,
So
would
you're-
we put
But if you're
manufacturers
gonna-
somewhere else?
Are you right? If you're going to be putting them
Or
in the
put
same.
them all in the same
If you're
place.
putting them in the same districts, it really doesn't matter.
Right,
So
'cause-
the question
yeah.
is, where do you want to put the micro business? Under,
Item 10 or item 32?
which is what
Maybe we should
sections
stick
of
a
the-
pin in item 10.
No, no more pins. We're finishing this.
I mean, do you want to at least talk about the heavy industrial?
Yes, let's talk, definitely let's talk about that. And that's where I'm not entirely certain, and I'm sorry that I don't understand the definition better, but is micro business definitely more of a, as you described the cultivator as a light industrial use. Are we certain that the marijuana micro business is similarly a light industrial use?
Not sure we're
Well,
certain.
it's
I
small.
think it's going to be like with the Glennis, it's going to be like a microbrewery. It's going to be like
Yeah.
a smaller,
Okay.
something different.
Okay.
Feel that maybe somebody is marketing.
I'm just
different
wondering,
things.
I mean, are you saying that marijuana manufacturing is heavy industrial? I mean, it's making edibles. is making
It
food.
could be a commercial kitchen.
Can I opine on that a little bit?
If you come to the
Chief, can you come to the
microphone.
microphone? Thank you.
I did have an opportunity to go up and spend a couple hours touring the facility up in Quincy, which is a medical marijuana. And if you can't find the place, all you have to do is roll down your window.
Really?
Oh, gosh.
The odors, because they have to vent it constantly,
Right.
and they have to keep a certain moisture in it, they use an extreme amount of energy.
That's right.
They have moisture controls in there. Everything is state-of-the-art. So if you're involved in cultivation, I mean, I think if you're going to be locating somewhere, I mean, if I lived next to a bakery, I'd weigh about 100 pounds more. Or I can remember, you know, in the square, you'd walk at night and there'd be popping popcorn in the movie theater, and it just, the odor, I mean, so I think when you're talking this heavy cultivation, or even the lighter cultivation, I think it's if you have 5,000 square feet of growing plants, it's going to give off a tremendous odor
Yeah,
so,
I
I
never
mean,
even
that's
thought of
something
that.
I think
That's
you
not
need
my
to,
point.
you need to consider.
going to be heavy.
It is strong. It's a strong pungent odor. I mean, we know what marijuana smells like, and there's also other things they're doing. They're cooking, and then they're using industrial products to
And they don't have anything
extract
that's
the oils
supposed
and
to,
everything else.
like, diminish that odor or anything like that? I mean, aren't they supposed to?
I don't know, I smell it for 3 days, to be honest with you. No, and you don't even realize it, because
that is firsthand
I
evidence,
stopped
yeah.
out and I went places, and people are like, geez, you really smell it.
I hope you had uniform.
Keep it up,
Yeah,
Chief.
we had to change, all three of us. It was by the school resource officers went, so that's just something to consider with that. And I just wanted one other point.
Yeah, please.
If I was looking at a law and I had to interpret the issue of where kids hang out, I think you have to look at it, the business would have to have some design to it that attracted the children to it. So if you're talking about a restaurant that just happens to be popular at nighttime, because the kids used to hang out at AJ's, and we'd chase them out of there, or when, I mean, kids hang out
Right,
wherever
Brooks,
they find a place.
behind-
It's not a business that's designed for kids to hang out.
Not a Build-A-Bear?
Yeah, so I mean, you'd have to have to me, to have that, what they're referencing in that would be the playgrounds, and like, we talked about Beale Street, so you have football fields and baseball fields over there designed specifically for kids' usage. That would be an area there. Or if we had a business that had something to do, like Build-A-Bear or something, and its
Challenge
main
Rock.
business was to attract that age group of children. So I'd just be careful what you,
So you don't think that because that's a popular place for kids to hang out, that would trigger it?
its primary business is not to attract kids.
Yeah, just happens to do
And
that.
probably, you know, those attractions only come at certain times. You know, I think the intent is, and I think that's how the law usually works, is what's the intent of the wording? And I don't think, that would be something you'd have a hard time, I think, if you tried to restrict somebody.
That's why I said it would get squishy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, is an ice cream shop
And no one-
designed, what's their clientele? They just want your money. They don't care who buys the product, you know, but you tend to bring your kids there, but that's not the function of it. So, I mean, that's just my interpretation,
Yeah,
I think.
that's good.
It's a good point.
Good point.
And the odor is a really good point.
Yeah,
Never thought of
because,
that.
like I said, and industrial parks are equipped with better electricity and, you know, three-phase and stuff like that, which would be cheaper for them to use than a single-phase in a residential area.
Yep, okay.
So.
Thank you.
Good point.
Well,
Panic
this-
buttons
this
are gonna
gets-
be tied
This
into
gets
your
back to
face, just so you
specifically
know.
thinking about
The
neighbors.
panic buttons are gonna be
To
tied.
these
About
what?
neighbors
We don't
to
do
these
that.
districts, people that live, you know, like
Yeah.
Hingham Woods is across the
just want some of those
street
social
from
Back river.
limited
Beals
industrial.
Cove,
River.
And then
Almost
there's,
called a project turnabout.
yeah,
Also, the Hayton subdivision back there too, that's red.
Back River.
Back River, right.
So would you want, so my
And
sense is.
Fowler Road.
Fowler Road.
So are you saying that
Backs up
marijuana
to Talbot's.
microbusiness is not light industrial, and you would cross it out of item 10 then?
Well, I think the chief makes a good point about odor, and if it's that strong and we're allowing it in a district, but we need to, I mean, I guess we need to apply it equally across town too, so we need to look at the industrial park similarly.
Well, yeah.
You do also have performance standards within, that you've already discussed, that the zoning board's supposed to think about sound and odor
Okay.
and negative impacts, and that's in 5B? Let me look at my numbering.
Thank you for
5B,
reminding me.
approval criteria.
Right.
The business must be designed to minimize adverse visual, odor, audible,
Yep.
vehicular, economic impacts on abutters or the surrounding neighborhoods. But to the chief's point, a manufacturing facility does vent. And that sounds like that's what a micro business is.
Right.
So then I circle back to the question of, is that really a light? It might be small in size, Gordon said, it may be small in size, but it's heavy in intensity of use. So maybe it's not light industrial. And if you were to allow it, perhaps you leave it under item 32, which is the marijuana product manufacturing, which is already there, testing facility, a marijuana micro business, or wholesale business dealing in marijuana accessories. That's item 32.
Yep. So these we're treating separately because they're a heavier use. They're a more industrial use in terms of maybe truck traffic and what else? Like, let's talk about how these are different.
Well, I originally separated them when we drafted this because that was before micro business was on the scene. And so a marijuana cultivator felt different than a marijuana product manufacturing, testing facility, or wholesale business.
Right.
It felt a little different. Maybe it's not.
I don't know.
It felt more industrial agricultural.
I see, yeah.
Like a cultivator, they don't sell it on site, they basically grow it. And not the micro business where it's seed to home kind of thing.
Are they treated similarly in terms of security and all of those other things we've discussed by the statute? Probably all the different uses, yeah.
I think they would be
right?
treated the
They're
same.
all
Is the micro
entities under
business?
the same
I would think
statement.
so.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
think they would all have to have those requirements.
Okay,
And they're all treated the same under your regulations for the
Right.
special permit A2
right,
standards.
okay. So where does this leave us? Where are we now? You're asking if the micro business should be moved to the other.
I'm asking if you want micro business in item 10. And what I heard so far in pencil was the cultivator. One person said perhaps the industrial park district and the limited industrial park district and prohibited in all other.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the best we're gonna get with it.
Yep.
And would you take micro business out of this area and put it down with the heavy industrial?
Yes.
I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, out of this item 10.
You think it's more
Right.
similar to the cultivator, or?
I mean, they may ultimately be in the same areas anyway with your...
yeah, where are we going to put the heavy industrial?
That's true.
Well, that's the next thing you have to discuss.
Well, so are you saying cultivation is not the heavy industrial based on?
So
No,
far,
but it's
that's
a
what we're
different
saying.
item here. That's all I'm saying.
Right, but I guess I don't know what you're calling heavy industrial if the cultivation isn't. Are you defining it based on what
So
they're
what I
doing,
was say-
growing versus
But Mary
manufacturing,
just
or on the
explained that she
impacts?
put them in the two different categories based on
Oh,
how she
okay.
perceived them to,
The impacts?
yeah.
Well, in cultivator, that was before marijuana micro business, seemed more of like the indoor agricultural or kind of, I don't want to say hydroponic, but an indoor grow facility, and it was like a single use, it was a cultivator.
Right.
Right? And then these other uses, the manufacturing, the testing facility, the wholesale business, I hear wholesale and I hear manufacturing, just in my mind, that just makes me feel it's heavier.
Right.
Truck traffic, like more heavy industrial, big factories.
Yep.
That's just one person's, that's the reasoning of why they're like
Yeah,
that.
no, that's fair. That's fair.
Right. I think, not to put words in your mouth, but if I understood what the chief was saying, I think he was saying that the cultivation has as big an impact as any of these non-retail uses have probably equal impacts due to odors, to
Yeah,
other
but I think
issues.
if you have an extensive cultivation thing, that's really a commercial business, and it's always being sold to the vet, it's like, you're manufacturing a
Microphone.
product,
You're on TV.
Yep, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Keep it loud enough without it. Chief Olson, if you're cultivating it and you have a large building, you're cultivating it, you're not selling it to the public. You're not going to have any walk-in business. So I'm just trying to think that we don't see those types of operations in anywhere but industrial areas. Because you would have, that's where they generally go, because, and then they would be shipping out their product, and people would be ordering it, and they'd be making deliveries to these various places. So that's why I would tend to stick them, well, I would think that's where they would belong. And I said, and then during the processing of all this stuff, it just fits to be in that area, because they are, basically, it's a different process, but they're still manufacturing and growing just a plant instead. And the confusing thing by this is the definitions is so many different things that they do. It's not just growing the plant, it's what they do with it afterwards. And this business is so much more than we can even believe, and it grows constantly. Turpentines, where they do it's all about the scents and the odors. It's the oils that they do, and then it will be the products that they could be baking, because if they're in a manufacturing, they could be baking cookies and then selling them to the distributors. Or the shops.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely more of a, I mean, if you just drove around town, or probably any town, you're going to see those in industrial park areas. You're not going to see them, in the middle of a Hingham Square. That just doesn't fit in that.
Yep.
That's why we have industrial districts.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're for. So to me, those, I'm not quite sure what the micro one is, but I'm just thinking it's sort of a smaller operation, or a specialty type product.
Right.
That they might try to manufacture.
Yeah.
Here, Chief, I have another copy of this.
So where does that leave us? Are we, go ahead, Gordon.
We need an expert.
So, no.
I
Do.
I'm sensitive to striking some geographic balance on where we put these, but if things are evidently industrial, right, and we created industrial district for
Industrial uses.
Yeah, for that reason, I think that, and the chief's right. Those sorts of businesses go there to stay away from neighbors,
Yep.
right?
Right.
Because their operations by
Yeah.
definition are
Yep. So what if we lumped all of these together, meaning the cultivator, the micro business, and then the others, which are the wholesaler, product manufacturing, testing facility, and said industrial park
Yeah.
for all
I
of
think
them?
that's the best option.
I think so. Wasn't there some co-op definition or something like that? There was some, I thought I
That's
recall
the,
another.
I think that's the
Has that
micro
since
business, isn't
changed?
it?
Wasn't there some mixed-use
Cultivator,
co-op?
cooperative cultivators,
That's right.
cultivators.
Is that, yeah. I can't find it now, but I thought,
Cultivator established micro product retailer, testing facility.
Sarah, I know you can't
Yeah, I
stay,
gotta
but
go.
you're,
I'm fine with that, yeah.
sounds like you're on board. We're, on similar pages in terms of, okay.
Yeah,
It's in the
if you
state
guys wanna vote,
definitions?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you.
Better.
that's what it was. It was in the regs. That's right.
Oh, you know what, so with some of the regulations, it's just a subset of something, of another use.
Of the ones we're already talking
Of the
about.
ones you're already talking
Okay,
about.
all
So, some of them, if they were a subset of something else,
The craft marijuana cultivator cooperative.
right, it's still a cultivator.
Fine. Unless, we don't have to worry about the social consumption establishment anymore.
Thanks for
Thank you, Sarah.
reading. Thank you.
So a craft marijuana cultivator cooperative means a marijuana cultivator, so it's already within marijuana cultivator.
Got it. Okay, great.
It's a type of
No, that's fine,
cultivator.
that's fine.
Okay, so where we just landed, still in pencil, perhaps, is that we now, especially hearing from the chief and thinking about what these places look like and feel like and how they present themselves, we would not feel the need to separate them in terms of location, and that we would put them all in the industrial park district.
All right, so just from a
And not the limited
Right.
industrial.
Right.
And
Okay.
so you're so item 10 and item 32, you would combine?
Right, so wait a minute, let me.
Yeah, I need to understand.
Yeah, either combine
That's
or,
exactly it.
either
We would
combine or make them read the same,
We would
whatever is
combine.
easier
Or we
at
can
this
make, we
point,
would move 32 into 10, make it one item.
however you want to do it.
Well, actually, so we're adding, so 2.3,
So I think that it should be 2.4, actually.
or it says
but-
2.4, but,
Right, so 2.4, it doesn't have to be under agricultural. I
Right,
mean,
so
you
we can
could
leave
just put it all under industrial. You could put it, and make it all 6.3, and make them all marijuana cultivator, micro business,
best we can do.
manufacturer,
It's not perfect
research.
like the
You
other.
could just put them all in as wholesale industrial.
so we would add marijuana cultivator in item 32.
So, let's see. Right, except you'd get rid of item 10, so it wouldn't be item 32
And we'd-
anymore.
Right, they're gonna have to renumber, but we'd ultimately strike item 10,
Right,
and we'd put it, marijuana cultivator in item 32. I think I heard the board say they want to also include marijuana micro-business.
Yep.
Yep.
And then the board so far has said industrial park district prohibited in all others.
Yes.
I will call out, I don't think it's a problem. I think I'm just tired, but I do want to call out that one of the definition changes, which we haven't gone through yet,
Right.
is to exclude marijuana establishments from the definition of light industry. And then looking at the use table, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's a problem because we're actually adding, it's
right,
called, we're
because
adding
light
a new
industrial is
category,
6.2.
but we're adding 6.3.
3, that would cover it.
So
Right,
that just kind of forces it into that.
into
restriction.
6.3, yep.
So, in terms of our discussion, it doesn't sound like any of us are thinking there's any reasoning for excluding any particular use, right? I mean, I know I keep floating it, but we're not really discussing excluding any of the particular uses. And I have a couple of other, so I'm just sort of stating that to remind us that we can exclude uses if that's what we want to do. I have two other things, which are that if I'm not mistaken, we are allowed to limit the number of marijuana establishments in town, and we have not yet proposed doing that, and I wonder if I think we might want to.
I would say, and I mean,
Yeah,
that's not, right, you can. I'd say I didn't necessarily do the kind of deeper review into that, because
Yes,
I
no,
wasn't
that's not
expecting
fair
a
of me to
conversation,
spring it on you
because
at 10 o'clock tonight.
in kind of less intense back and forth on this, with John, the question is, you know, again, is limiting the number a zoning bylaw? Because the zoning bylaw goes to use. So is the number, right, is that something that would have to be dealt with in a general as well? Or at, you know, both, if
Right, okay.
one or either or the both?
Good point.
But the board hadn't really raised
No,
that
you're right,
question.
and I'm sorry, I just did now. I mean, I'm not sorry that I did, but I'm sorry that I
No,
waited.
no, no, I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying, I really haven't spent the time and kind of bantered back and forth with John as to, and kind of looked into, and Mary, you haven't heard about other towns actually limiting the number, have you, going
No,
there?
They haven't. People have been, although we're allowed to, I think it's to 20% of your liquor licenses.
No, well, Hingham can, because Hingham's a no community, Hingham
So
can
you
do whatever it wants.
Okay.
That's right.
But I haven't heard of that. What I've been hearing is people are either selecting a particular class of use, like, for example, we're North Andover and we only want to have like the,
Although that failed too, but.
it failed, but I mean.
Right,
but
they
picked
tried-
a
They were doing the
class.
lab guy, right? The
It
testing
failed
facility.
how? It failed at town
Well,
meeting?
they
It failed-
proposed only to allow manufacturing.
Yeah,
And
The town
town
said no.
meeting did not agree, so I think they may end up with a total ban, because they couldn't even get the manufacturing through.
And it was in a discrete area, I think it was.
In an
a-
industrial, in like a 100,000
the old
square
Lucent
foot
property,
empty
wasn't it?
warehouse.
It was an abandoned property, or
Yeah.
it was
It's
like,
the old Lucent Technologies property.
Yep.
however, so some places are trying to say, we're only gonna let this one type of use happen in this one type of area. Those have not been overly successful.
Well, and that's the risk, and I know we've talked about this before, that if the ban fails at town meeting, and then we put forward something that also fails at town meeting,
Then it
we're
goes
left with
anywhere.
nothing.
Yeah, that's
And it goes in as of right.
suboptimal.
Goes in anywhere.
I mean, so far, what you've discussed does provide opportunities, kind of spread between both parts of the town.
Yeah. All right, so I'd like to go to my other point, which is, the chief made such a good point about the odor, that I just want to look, if we could look quickly again at 5B, which is the approval criteria, which is, the way we worded it is, the marijuana establishment or business dealing in marijuana accessories is designed to minimize any adverse visual, odor, audible, vehicular, or economic impacts on abutters or the surrounding neighborhood. Now, what I'm thinking here is there any way on the odor specifically to have a higher standard? So not designed to minimize, but could it be designed to avoid odor impacts?
It's such a strong odor.
How do we handle the septic, like,
It's such a strong odor, I don't know
Right.
how you can.
So sensitive to
A lot
that,
of
that
those
can
have-
happen to people.
Yeah, it's,
a lot of the septic systems like we heard about with the assisted living, they actually have the scrubbers that the air has to go through,
Yeah.
like the sand filter, and then
Right.
it goes through the other filter.
But designed to
could-
minimize
yeah.
means there's still some,
I don't know if you
right?
could,
It's,
yeah.
can
Well, I
we
don't think
say,
there's a threshold.
I mean, you just can't, yeah, I mean, it's the odors, I mean, a single joint is a very strong odor. I've smelled it around Boston, walking around
Yes.
work, I mean,
Right.
it's very strong.
Because we say minimize noise, and on some businesses, like the ZBA or has in the past, asked for sound muffling equipment, like for the generators, or put things inside a building.
I think, listen, I agree. I think it has to be minimized. I guess I'm less strong, because I know when we were looking for a house a number of years ago, we were looking up at a house that happened to be for sale up in South Hingham on the south side of Derby Whiting Street. And it was behind what's the Chinese restaurant that's up there now. I don't know what restaurant it was at the time,
Yep.
but it was literally butted to it, and I'm like, I think it would make me crazy if every time I was sitting in my yard, I was smelling Chinese food. So I just think there's that's why, right? That's why you try to separate businesses from residential. So I guess it all depends, right, also on where it is in the industrial park, right? If it's,
yeah.
I
guess
We know
all-
it's gonna be at least 500 feet back,
right.
right, so we know that.
From a residential area?
Right.
It's good, it's
And you
500
know
feet
what,
setback.
I mean, what's interesting, when you go down Abington Street, there's a ton of ledge there and grade change. It's not like you just drive right off of Abington Street into the industrial park, right? So it's really, you're coming in more off of Industrial Park Road, that area, come in there. And so the question is, if it's back up off the Rec Park Drive area, that's closer to homes than if it's, as Sarah was saying,
It's going to be somewhere
The-
west way.
yeah, they're going to want to get on and off, right. That's why the industrial park was put
Right.
there.
I guess
It's right here.
all I'm asking is if we could impose a higher standard than designed to minimize for the odor. I hear you, and I think that the 500 setback it's good. I'm just super sensitive to smells, and I'm super sensitive to the folks that live down here near the industrial park, since that's where we're putting it now, and so I'm just, is it possible to pull out just the odor?
Apply industry
require
best
occupational-
practices.
I just can't answer your question right now, and the reason is, because I didn't come prepared to answer it. It's lights, we can look at foot candles. Sound, we have,
Noise
decibel
monitoring.
level, right? I'm not sure what industry standards or measurements there are, because I haven't looked at
The
it.
industry must have
So-
some way to mitigate the smell.
I'm
What we
I'm
could-
certain that they do.
What we could do is we could require Jellyfish filters.
What are jellyfish filters?
It's a long story.
Oh, okay.
That's what they were the other night.
Well,
Which
now,
seems so long ago,
now we know what
actually.
time Bill
It's
gets
very odd.
punchy.
I'm like, I have a vague recollection of that,
Jellyfish.
48 hours
That
ago.
clock
We
is
talked
wrong.
about
It's
jellyfish.
throwing me
it's
off.
very wrong. It's
You know
not
what, the
17.
jellyfish was at about 10:15 Monday night.
So there we
Yeah, we
go.
talked about that for a long time.
So
Okay.
here's a question, how about can we modify the odor to say, have it be a separate sentence to say, reduce or mitigate odor using best technology,
The highest
best
industry
practices?
The highest industry, highest industry standards.
Because that's gonna also evolve too. I'm sure there's mechanical air scrubbers that they use. I just don't know
Yeah, I mean, I'm
what
sure
they're
they have
called.
them in Colorado and those states that have it.
Right.
Because there are neighbors around there, and neighbors complain about the smell, so.
Right.
So, but
just think
that's,
all
you're
of
just
the-
talking about in the purpose, wait, where was that?
Talking about under approvals.
In
5B.
5B.
Okay.
We can just change it to
Yeah,
highest
I like
industry
that
standards.
solution,
Because the
Mary, and I know
CPA
it's
is
not
very
necessarily perfect, but it calls that one out specifically, because if you live next to an industrial park, it is wildly appropriate to minimize adverse visual effects, audible, vehicular, economic, those are sort of expected if you're living next to. The odor is different, it would
Because it just
Well, it's
permeates.
pervasive.
it'd be in your house.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
So what about, is designed to minimize, take odor out of there? 'Cause
Move odor and maybe make it a separate sentence. and
Right,
say,
design any,
yeah, maybe the highest industry standards. will
it's
even
designed
probably
to,
minimizing
I
or
would say
reducing.
one, minimize any adverse visual, audible,
Yeah, and two,
vehicle, and two, employ, what language you like, Bill? You were
industry
saying-
best
Yeah,
practices.
it would, highest industry standards.
for odor
Right.
reduction or elimination,
Best is often used.
Best,
Best.
best, instead of highest,
Best
right.
practices?
Smart.
best industry practice standards.
Whatever. either
Yeah,
one.
right, I mean, there may be,
The same.
there may be
And that might
something out there that
No, but
I don't know
I'm
about because I
happy
haven't looked
with
into
just
it.
addressing it separately, thank you.
For reduction or elimination,
Mitigation, yeah.
or would you want reduction, mitigation, or elimination? What do you,
I don't know where we are.
Mitigation.
for the mitigation, Odor.
Chief's right, we need an expert. Where's Barnard when you need him?
Right, exactly.
He knows all this stuff. He knows all this stuff.
manufacturer. I wish we had that guy who, like, right, there's the guy who said he owns a part of one.
All right, so where are we, Mary?
So you still, the one thing that you need to go through is the definitions. If what you had in pencil, if I could repeat it to you quickly to make sure I get it correct, and then I think we need to go through the definitions very quickly, because the definitions would be the same as the separate article that you
Yeah.
have that are definitions.
Okay, and do they need to be read out loud, or can I just ask my fellow board members if they have read them, and if we're,
So they're
Are we
from
talking
the,
about
they're from
item
the
two?
statute. The
Yeah.
only three that I just want to highlight for you is item 3, and I'm looking in the highlighted version of the article,
yep,
because it's easier to read at this time.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt? I mean, it is such a thing. There's a whole paper here, odor basics, understanding and using odor testing. I mean, it's a thing. Let me see if you want to, do you want to walk through that? And I'll
Okay.
just see if there's a reference
thank you.
that might be more technically correct.
So item 3 in this markup, that's amending the definition for the farmer's market to exclude marijuana products and marijuana accessories from the farmer's market.
do we all agree on that?
Agreed.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Item 4 was to amend the definition of home occupation to exclude marijuana establishments and businesses dealing in marijuana accessories from being considered home occupations.
Okay, do we all agree with that?
Agreed.
Okay. Me too.
And then the fifth one, or the next one is item 5, and that is to exclude marijuana establishments or businesses dealing in marijuana accessories from the definition of light industry. And again, the reason is that we added an entirely new category in the industrial section of the use table specifically for the marijuana uses. So we wanted to exclude it from 6.2
Okay.
and make sure that any industrial marijuana establishment went in under 6.3, because there'll be different zoning districts.
Okay. Do we all agree with that?
Agreed.
I agree.
Makes sense.
And then the other definitions that are inserted are straight from, you've read
That's what I
them
was
a
just
couple
Googling.
times, and we've been referring them
Yep.
to them tonight.
Yep.
Marijuana, and they were in the
What did you Google?
PowerPoint.
Industrial
Yep,
marijuana.
that's all of item 2 you're referring to.
Correct. The
Okay.
only new one was the micro business, which we've read tonight.
Yep. And we've been through this before. Do either of you have any comments on the item 2, the definition portion of this zoning article?
Not for me.
No, we've been
Okay.
up and down.
Great.
So can we just reiterate the other? So we took out item 10.
Wait, so hold on. Yes, go slowly, though.
All right, wait a minute. So I just want to verify, if you're wrapping up, I just want to
Well,
make sure.
we're wrapping up, but we need to go, we put a pin in detail and never really went back to it. I think we just need to confirm.
Well, so did you go in order? So everything's done up until, well, we just changed 5B, although I'm trying to just see if I have any better language I can give you real quickly. 6, so if you're looking at the track, right?
We were
Everyone's
going
looking at
through,
the
we were
article?
going through the zoning article. We were going through the
Yeah, the zoning article, okay.
And we just
Okay,
finished
6 was the
item
changes.
5.
All right. Oh, okay, so I was just, item 2, we're done with it, that's the done. You did all of, 3, 4, and 5.
So
Okay.
now we're on 10,
Right, which we're.
Which you're taking out.
which you're striking.
So then we just need to renumber.
Right, so Mary's asking us to confirm
Yep.
where we were.
And then we flip to the next page, to item 28.
Right, so
Now we're
the
back to the
changes
retail.
since the 15th was after Jen, Mary, and I met, was to, in order to avoid any confusion, to just tack on the special condition to 10 to almost pretty much all of the existing
and other
uses
yeah.
in the bylaw. So that's what all those insertions, 18 through 26, did.
Right.
They're just adding the special condition 10, which prohibits the marijuana establishments.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, Mary. Then we're
No,
on
and that's the same reason, that forces it
Into
only
the
into your
narrow categories.
narrow categories that you're doing.
So then 28, this is now, in 29, here's where you are.
So now we need to
Your
pick up our
pen.
pencils and make it a pen.
And this is the retail use and the businesses dealing in.
Yep.
And in pencil, we have Business District B.
And we had talked about District B, right? So what do we think on this at this point, now that we've been through the whole universe of it? I can't see a better option.
Yeah.
I don't want it in the derby shops,
Right,
Unless we prohibit it altogether.
it'd be,
unless we don't allow this use in town. Okay, that's a good thing to discuss.
if we can restrict the use, just restrict the use.
Just no retail, and we're limited to the industrial
I
stuff in the
mean, you were
industrial.
no community.
So let me just ask the practical question. If you can't get 2/3 for a ban, it's because you don't really have, okay, I'm just making observations now, okay? These are not legal comments. These are observations based on your hearings to date. Of the people who, granted, were the minority, who came in and did not want a ban, none of them were saying, because I want to have, grow it or manufacture it or whatever. It's they want to go down to the local store and buy it. And so if your ban fails, and then you have a time, place, and manner that says, and by the way, you're not going to be able to walk into a store in Hingham and buy it anyway, will it pass?
Well, okay, but devil's advocate, while we're just
Right. Yeah,
speculating.
yeah.
There could be a population of people out there that see the revenue opportunities from recreational marijuana and the value that could have for the town. There's revenue opportunities from
Right.
the manufacturer and cultivation. They may take that because they're reluctant to do the retail. They may not want the whole enchilada, but if there is a light footprint revenue potential,
Right, that's a
You know,
good point.
so we could parlor
Right.
game this out for a long time.
Right.
We could, and again, and just in the devil's advocate, you know, to the extent people have spoken in favor of the retail, it's because the town would impose a 3%
Tax.
local tax that they would get off of every sale, similar to the meals tax. Whatever the board wants to do, that's what we're gonna put down in respect. I'm doing, because it's getting so late, I'm just doing the back and forth pro and con.
Yeah,
So-
I know.
Because I don't, based on what the board's statements is that you really want to ban. If you have the ban fail and then you have the time, place, and manner fail, you really have no regulation.
Big problem, right.
Right, but I would like to just point out, for the record, and anyone who's watching, this is the problem with having, from a planning perspective, this is not how you would plan. You would know whether or not the ban passed or failed before you actually plan, because this parlor game, as you describe it, is so much fun, and everyone has a different opinion on where and why people would vote for or against the ban, especially the against, and it's difficult, and we're left in this position of guessing, right? And being ready on the floor of town meeting with
Right.
a plan B if our plan A ban fails. Which doesn't solve the
I would say a
question.
lot of the majority of the letters we got against it did cite a requested prohibition on retail.
That's right.
That's true. That's
Yeah, I know there was some-
100%
yeah.
true.
It was, all of them did. Now, again,
So maybe the ban will carry.
Right.
Right.
The
That's the other
counterpoint to that,
calculation.
the parlor game to that is that if we then put forward a time, place, and manner that didn't allow retail,
Retail.
which is what they didn't
Would
want.
that go
then
down?
they
It
would be everywhere.
Then they would be okay with the time, place, and manner and would vote down the ban. Because if they don't want retail and they're fine with the other, they would.
I don't
not.
think that's,
I'm just saying, this is the
Right,
fun,
this is the
the fun game.
It's gonna
how we
be-
can
The
drive
not so
ourselves
fun
crazy
game. Right.
now until town meeting.
So I think you have to strike the balance that you think is reasonable and that you're comfortable with, given all the things that you don't know and the fact that you're backed into making this decision.
Yeah, there's nowhere
We're in the
near
hot seat.
comfort, I think, in any, right, this is,
That was not
you
helpful.
know, we're,
It's tempting to ban the retail use, but I see
based
the
on,
arguments.
based on the input we got, like I said, the majority of individuals who told us to ban it decided retail use, so I'm comfortable with banning it.
Then you'll be back to, the only place in town you will allow a marijuana establishment will be in the industrial park
That's a good point.
in South Hingham.
That's a good point.
So you'll be back to that conversation. Proving that there's no good answer, no easy answer.
No easy answer.
Let's see.
So while you mull that, I have a suggestion on odor. I'm still
So
smelling
you
it.
just deal with odor. We have to mull this. Hold on. Whatever you prescribe is fine. I think you got our gist.
Yeah, whatever you want to.
No, but in something that, I'm suggesting that under section 4, special permit requirements, where it has, that special permit application shall include the following, that instead of 7 and 8, and after 8 you have and then 9 is going to be, because I found one in Denver,
So comma, and, no, semicolon.
semicolon, and number
And-
9, a odor control plan.
Ooh,
They have a template in Denver, in the county of Denver, for odor control plan template marijuana cultivation. So I just think, make a submission, their odor control plan, which then can be peer reviewed.
Yeah.
Great.
And we'll still include
And
the
still include the
language.
other
Okay.
language.
Perfect.
good.
That's
So,
great.
okay?
That's great.
so say 9 and
Odor control plan.
So it's certainly not our intent, certainly not our intent to pit one part down against the other. But my general feeling on this is that if the ban fails, and then this fails, then so be it.
I like it. Wild West.
I mean, what else can we do? What else can we do?
10:30
I
PM
mean,
statement.
and I think people are gonna be warned of
Right.
those. I mean, honestly.
No, I get it, right? I mean, those
Susan
are,
and I had the same conversation with the medical marijuana, where, Susan and I worked on a lot together, and we said, hey, if it doesn't go there, then it's gonna go anywhere. And that was one of the pitches I made at town meeting was, we don't want it here, then get ready. And I don't know what a better solution we have, but
Okay.
I mean, if you two feel strongly about the,
No,
keeping the
I don't
retail
know.
and spreading out the wealth, then we do that, but.
I mean, I'm already in favor of the ban, and part of that is wanting to ban retail
Right.
in town. So it's consistent with my ideals, it's just part of this, the back and forth. Victor looks like he wants to speak.
Victor can help us.
Yes, I'm a little surprised by the discussion and sort of think maybe it's the hour, because I guess I'm sort of sympathetic to Susan's points. All along, this has been presented, and we've presented it to advisory to the extent we've talked about what's been going on, as a fallback if the ban doesn't pass. And the retail, I think that most people, when they think of marijuana, is the retail. We're going to go to the shop and buy it. They're not really thinking about all of the cultivation, the product manufacturing, testing facilities, and those other uses. So I do think that if you had the ban fail, and then you said, and by the way, no retail, people are going to say, well, that's just the ban again, and we're going to defeat it. So I don't know what advisory's view would be on it. We hadn't really talked about saying, all right, we're going to have basically a ban, and if the ban fails, we're going to have another ban.
A ban of retail, right.
Well, I think,
And if that is
I
what
believe
everybody's-
that 99% of the people in Hingham are only thinking about retail. And they don't even have a clue about cultivation, manufacturing, and everything else. And
Let's ban that.
again, I mean, listen, it's up to the board, and you guys know, I give you my input, I try to, in addition to my legal advice, counsel and town council, giving some counsel, are you going to accomplish the goal that you've set out for? If you ban retail, because I agree exactly, I think that Victor said it much more articulately than I'm saying it now at 10:30 at night, which is, you're proposing a ban, which if it fails, you're proposing another ban on really the only aspect of this that 99.9% of the people in the town are even thinking about.
It is fairly restrictive, right? But
It is, but it's also next to
Well, I
neighborhoods
mean,
in town.
the bigger concern is where we put it. I mean,
Right.
it's not,
Right, the only reason we're considering it
concern
is
is-
because
yeah,
we have no
because we
good
don't know
answer
where
on
to
where to put it.
I'm not,
wherever we
I'm
do
not
it, wherever we put it,
critiquing in
people
any
are not
way.
going to be happy with it.
Right.
Correct.
And, I can tell you, if we put it where we're proposing to put it, those folks can be very upset. And-
Absolutely.
And I get all of it, but
Right, but then isn't the argument that if this is going to be out there, it's going to be in the warrant, there's going to be articles in the newspaper, if people don't want it where you're proposing to put it, then they need to come to town meeting and vote for the ban, right? I mean, that's their choice.
but then we spread it out all over town.
Right, but but it goes
I mean-
back to, listen,
What I'm saying is,
I don't-
everybody gets a taste of it,
You know,
because.
maybe I shouldn't say-
Then everybody gets
Well,
it.
I think, right, I
Everybody
think you
gets a
should let
little
us talk a
bit,
little
right?
bit.
Yeah.
So, then everybody gets a little bit of it. And we'd be completely equitable.
Right. And I think Victor makes a good point that maybe it's been presented to folks that there's the ban and then there's the time, place, and manner, but the reality is that not all the folks that have been thinking about this understand that there are all these different uses and how each of them present themselves and what the different revenue opportunities are for each of them. And at the end of the day, in a year from now or 2 years from now, and I've said this to you several times, Mary, no one's going to care or think about the fact that the planning board was in the hot seat because of timing. We have either the ban at town meeting
Right.
or we have
What
this.
they're gonna say,
This is
what
going
were
to
they
say, this
thinking?
is what the planning
Right,
board
right.
did.
So when the first one goes in, first, they say, what
So-
were those three
And
people
that's the
thinking?
part that's the most, and I know I said this in a different way earlier, but that's the frustrating part of having to come up with this under the gun, because this might not be how we would, it probably isn't how exactly we would do it if we already knew if the ban passed or failed.
We would almost certainly not, right.
And that's, right, and that's our conundrum,
and-
and I can't solve that, but
Right.
it
And
might
I-
create these weird things where people are not getting exactly what they expected.
And I do get that most folks are focused on the retail. The thing I can't shake, in addition to the awkward position that we're in from the way the legislature passed it last June, the regulators, the commission, is clearly focused on all these other possible activities, right? They are the ones that are coming up with these new definitions,
Yeah.
and these new groups. So the governing body is interested in more than just retail. So it's, and we're just forced to know that because of all the, time we're spending on it. So we have to be cognizant of that.
But you
But
know,
I think the time, place, and manner,
But, yeah, I'm just trying to get so if we are going to propose time for the plan, but we say, okay, we are going to allow the retail use, and I get it, Victor made a very good point. Then why would we say, oh, it's just going to be here? Like, oh, it's only going to be off of
Well,
Beale
right,
Street
you could make that
or
argument
in the
about
ship
anything
here.
we decide.
Why should we say, well, it should be downtown? It should be.
well, I mean, I think the logic that we kicked around earlier, that this type of activity is a little different than what we see on, right in the downtown, that it is a destination, and, I mean,
I know.
and I think business B is what we're talking about, right, which does have locations both on the north and the south side of town. It does, and I get the let's put it everywhere argument, and now we as a town all need to care, as opposed to just small pockets of town caring,
Yeah, my only suggestion with that was we spread it out to not put it in one or two parts of town.
Yeah, no.
Burden those areas, we spread it out all over the town, and
And Nicole looks like she wants to weigh in. Would you come up to the microphone, please, so the folks on TV can hear you, and state your name and address for the record? Thanks.
Nicole Rafelson, 244 Main Street, Hingham, Mass. I'm also on the AdCom. So I'm just sort of thinking about the whole manufacturing and what you were saying about visiting a plant or a facility. And who, like the refuse, like, is that, who governs the disposal of the refuse? I'm just sort of thinking about, is that something you would address, or?
No, it's in the state regs.
The state regs would talk about that and how it's disposed of. Okay, that was my only question. Thanks.
not incinerated as far as I know.
Not incinerated.
Back to my map.
Thank you, Matt.
Can I give you one other thought that's related to my?
You say, Chief? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm
Oh, I
sorry.
was
go
going to
ahead.
say, one comment. I think if you read through the state laws, and, I mean, I'm going to go out here on a limb and say the cannabis board is basically, has a great deal of control from the marijuana industry. And I think if you read their articles, you can pretty much open them up and look at the charts and tell you the areas that they're targeting. Hingham isn't one of them. And I know we're doing a lot of work, and I think it's the right work to do. But,
they're probably calling every town.
eventually they'll probably could end up with a couple of small, but I mean, right now, if you go to small shops in Hingham, they have a hard time staying in business because of the prices of the rental and everything else. And I think this is going to regulate itself quite a bit, in all reality, that this isn't going to be a high market area that someone's going to come in and, it's going to be, and I don't mean this, but, there's going to be areas where they have more clientele, more foot traffic, and more accessibility. The people in Hingham we have a bunch of alcohol licenses. They're all related to restaurants. People are coming down to eat. They're not coming down here to buy pot.
Right.
Why didn't we think of that an hour ago?
They might go together, but,
Right.
no, in all reality, I think, I don't want to get too carried away with this, but and I'm not a business expert, I just think from experience, you're not going to see
Right.
a lot of big businesses doing this. You're going to have a couple smaller shops that are probably going to be struggling. That's just my opinion. I'm not, like I said, we don't have people lining up around here looking to set these up, as far as I know.
So if I can just speak to that, I will tell you that I have already gotten a call from somebody about where they could locate in town. I suspect that they're probably calling every town, and I do get calls about medical marijuana facilities from time to time, so I do think that it is a business. I would also remind you that if you choose to allow this, say, in the Business B zone, or in any business zone, Business A, it's subject to the special permit criteria with, I mean, it's not going to be, it's going to have a site, find a site with a willing landlord that's going to be able to meet all the other criteria for security and queuing area and all of that. Now, is that impossible to do? No. But a lot of things will have to align. So it is a risk, and that's why you advance the ban. And we have two other things that we haven't discussed yet. So if the board, if you need to think about this and come back another night, or if we want to step away from the retail and just talk about the last two items, when we were kicking it around, Jen and Susan and I were doing a little deeper dive and just doing parlor games. Item 33 and item 34, those items, that came out of an exercise that we had when we were talking about retail, and is retail or businesses dealing in marijuana accessories appropriate for the shipyard if it's a business use. And at first we thought, oh no, it wouldn't. And then we started talking about it, and Susan looked in the bylaw a little more closely and realized that if you do not want to have, if you allow retail marijuana and businesses dealing in marijuana accessories, but you do not want them to locate within the shipyard, item 33 and 34 need to be also incorporated into the article.
And in the track changes version, it's on the page that's of the bylaw that's numbered page 29. So you can see how it would read.
Yep.
So basically, on page 28, there's the list, section 8C, that has all the permitted uses. But what happens in 8D on page 29 is in little Roman 2 and 3, it says uses not listed in paragraph 8C, if requested, may be permitted. So it kind of gives the ZBA almost like a carte blanche to allow any use. So what's proposed here is if it's not listed in 8C or prohibited in 8D little 5, then the ZBA can allow it. And so it adds an 8D little 5, which is marijuana establishments and businesses dealing are prohibited. So basically, it would keep it out of that Hingham shipyard.
Yeah, that's great. I think we all
That's good.
agreed on that, right?
Yeah, I think
Thank you
that's
for raising that we had not yet looked at it.
Okay, so then,
And then for the business, the only other counterpoint that I would make for you is, given that the board has expressed concerns about the impact of retail marijuana businesses in town, and that's why you want to have a ban, if the ban fails, your best opportunity to limit that impact or guide where the uses go is to actually prescribe it here. Because if you say, you know what, we don't want to have to pick where it goes, and the ban fails, then it literally could. And that was how we started this whole conversation back in November, where we said, if we don't say where it's going to go, somebody will come in and pull a permit. So we, staff, need you to give us the tools to say where it could go.
Business B.
Business B.
Business B.
I think you're right.
Yeah, it's a bit,
I think that prevails.
business B.
If we don't like it, we'll fix it next year. When we know what all the regulations are, and we know if the ban passed.
listen,
Do business B.
and now I'll say something like, Victor, cover your ears, which is, if on March 15th, something surprises us in the regulations, there is, you can go, the planning board can re-advertise, reopen its hearing, there can be a supplemental report. I mean, it could get, if there is still 5 weeks in there, that if something shocking comes out on March 15th, and you feel like you need to address it,
We could just put a placeholder in.
Buzzwords, a jellyfish placeholder.
Jelly
Parlor game, jellyfish placeholder.
That's a bad word in town hall,
That's
say
like a
placeholder.
I know.
All right.
All right.
so I think we're through it.
We good?
I need a motion. I need a motion. I know I need a motion.
Okay.
Not gonna run out yet. And then we also need to separately vote on the other bylaw, but we've been through it, or no?
We do need to vote on the
Okay,
definition.
so don't run away.
I'm not
But it will
going
be
anywhere.
quick. I know.
All right. I make a motion to act favorably on zoning article Triple H, regulation of marijuana establishments, stating, will the town amend the zoning bylaw of the town of Hingham adopted March 10, 1941 as herein follows regarding marijuana not medically prescribed, as discussed herein tonight.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Steve, thank you. Steve?
Very
take care.
unsatisfying, but.
And that's your question.
I know, right, that's the, like, the
Usually I'm
least,
like-
the least rewarding. Sorry.
Okay, so we have one more to go through, and it's super quick, and it's totally, it repeats what we already discussed, but we formally have to go through it. It's not substantive. Okay, that's so
gonna-
nice of you.
Change it to this.
What's the
Mary,
last
We
help me
talked
out.
about it, but not with the board
I
yet.
know, you and me
Can I'm
both.
sorry, can we just revisit it for 1 second? I think John and I had made just a recommendation on renaming 5J to regulation of marijuana establishments,
Which is
as
what the
opposed to
zoning bylaw is
marijuana
called.
not medically prescribed, just because
Yes.
marijuana establishments is the, like, statutory term.
So do we need to re-vote or amend our vote?
Yeah, can you
to-
just
I'll make a motion that we amend the vote to reflect the new and improved title of the zoning article HHH to be the regulation of marijuana establishments.
So section 5J would be called
Yeah.
regulation of
Oh.
marijuana
Yeah,
establishments.
yeah.
Thank you. What she said.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So the
Thank you.
definitions article is really our third tier, and simply, it's the subset of what you just went through tonight, and it's item 2. It's all of the definitions from the state statutes, as well as the amendment to farmer's market, home occupations, and light industrial.
Any change from what we discussed earlier?
It would mirror exactly what we just discussed.
You might make a motion, Jen.
Me make a motion? I can't even find it. What's the,
I.
thank you, what's it called?
Definitions related to marijuana not medically prescribed.
I don't have it.
We discussed it all, we already discussed
Yes,
it all.
so I'll make a
That's right.
motion that we act favorably on zoning article III, the definitions of, what was it?
Marijuana not medically.
Definitions related to marijuana not medically prescribed.
As discussed tonight.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great.
All right.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Well, it was a marathon meeting.
So, for a second.
Thank you for hanging in there.